With that glorious bite, we are set to commence. Portal Mountain, development meeting number 47. Welcome back after we've been, I guess, on a bit of a break here, which hasn't happened in it's been almost 2 years. Pushing 2 years, we started off doing it every week, then we were doing every other week, and that's been going on and on. And yeah, so now it's August 28th, 2022, and here we are to kind of pick things back up a little bit. Not necessarily where we left off, but so this year, every other week this year, the entire year so far, we've been developing a book, an outline for a table of contents, generating all kinds of notes for that, which I now have to process, which that's a whole other ball game. But
I'll be helping you with that.
With help, appreciate. But yeah,
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure questions will arise as you're trying to recall what the hell was said at some point.
For sure. And we really do need to work together. And I've been thinking about this, like, how do we get people to work together? It can't just be, us doing our development meeting or whatever, and then it's like, where does that go from there? Where do we progress? What are we creating? What are we bootstrapping? Do we even have a vision of our current bootstrap, right? Like, we have to, this is kind of my view of the dashboard in a bit.
Yeah, not to devalue the actual work that it already evokes from the get-go.
I'm getting all kinds of a bit of excited and ahead of myself, but yeah, we have been working on the Portal Mountain project. We, not only us, but a number of what you could call regulars and good friends have been working through conversation, through discussion, to develop all of these various, delve into the various facets of the model, right? So we couldn't have done it without others. It could never have just been you and me. We would. That's why we created the
perspective is important.
Right, the Portal Mountain organization project, beginning with like this Telegram version, if you will, Bootstrap, so that we could build something together with people. So I'm kind of struggling just a little bit so I've been researching project management. I took a class, in college or whatever, but figuring out how to get a handle on what's going on and like how to make changes and how to make things happen, right? And importantly, how to get people on the same page. So at least you know what everyone's trying to do, right?
It's another area I could actually help you a lot with because of my work environment.
Your training at work, yeah, I figured.
It's very much all about that.
But what I'm saying is, Portal Mountain now, I think, needs to transition into like version 2. Version 2 being where we are relying, our behavior is relying more on actually articulated things, right? So when I'm having a behavior and I'm like, why isn't someone else having that behavior? And I'm going to be upset. Meanwhile, it's not documented, right? It's not even expressed properly. I couldn't even express it in that moment, right? How is that person's fault if they're, not doing what I'm doing, right? So organization is about flowing and sharing of maps and flocking towards behavior. So the map is built out of like protocol, right? And this is kind of cosmology construction, which is
that's where my head was.
Which is our main kind of thing that we want to try to drive towards today, I think, is the Portal Mountain cosmology.
So as usual, in order to like talk about anything social, operating system related, we true to our pattern will of course delve straight right back into the neurochemical operating system and the happenings there that sort of build up the pieces that we try to tackle on the social scale.
Let me finish setting up the stream here.
So one of the things that you basically are trying to tackle is the question of how do you get people of different opinions, thoughts, and experiences.
How do y'all work together
to flock onto a single project and see it through, more importantly, than merely drop
That's
off
it. Yeah, yeah.
at the
So I feel like this topic is what's missing. We haven't really talked about it too much, but this I think would end up at the end of the book as well with the organizational stuff.
So I think we should tackle it in at least in a three-step fashion. The first being this cosmology that we're going to lay out.
Sure.
The second being the guild dynamics that would be involved in our solution, that one must be taken into consideration, with potential justifications for that. It's essentially the agile economics model that I'm referring to with that statement. And then, given the constraint of the guild dynamic, how will this solution look like? How will the imprint of this cosmology and the guild dynamic will be then inserted into the existing ongoing schema of current way of doing things.
So the flow of ongoing things as they are being somewhat so-called injected with model.
Right. The plateau that we're on top of.
Right.
So I think with those three steps, we can actually hit
something useful, like for organization, right? It's like something that builds something.
And interestingly enough, we have here an archetype model guild structure.
Yeah, I was noticing.
Because this is just like an archetypical view of the cosmology as a whole. The guild is part of a modeling of that whole, a specific intersection of it, and then the expressive whole of that archetype is seen through the actual organized instances.
In a concrete sense. You also could kind of flip it and see the cosmos being the concrete thing that's being initially given, sort of, right?
Yeah.
Like the interaction, the concrete interaction is to share cosmos. Then do that.
Flipping them is not a problem usually. Mirror effects
Normally.
are everywhere.
Yeah, so I think it would be cool to get into that, the cosmology of Portal Mountain, right? So, and we've been here a number of times, I'm sure. Tons, I mean, are we talking like we've got that chart with like the Portal Mountain lobby and like the...
No, this is like a mythoscape, like a hyperstitional mythological landscape.
And how's that different from seeing this Portal Mountain network?
It is
in
a
3D
representation of the cosmology that we're going to. So it's like a shorthand for a bunch of things that we would want to actually pick out from the cosmology in a particular structure. For example, that cosmology has a number of steps going upwards, which represent coherence, right? So we're talking about not just the cosmos in and of itself, but a map within it, right? Like it's a map.
Yeah. You mean the Portal Mountain map?
Yeah.
As like this academy structure specifically.
The relationship between those two is that like you don't mistake the map for the terrain. So the cosmology will be your terrain in this metaphor, and Portal Mountain acts as a mythological map of like with everything marked, right? So your coherence is marked, your temperament is marked, the relationship between the Grandmaster and or order and chaos is marked in the sense from the absurd coming from willing from below, or what do you call it? Welling from below.
Sure. I'm wondering if
the elements are directional.
So if we're gonna jump onto this Portal Mountain cosmology, are there any images existing already that we can just pull up? Like, if we want to kind of walk the reader through or the listener, the watcher, the viewer, the spectator, through the whole exposition of Portal Mountain cosmology, shouldn't we bring up we must have a chart or two we can start with? Like, where is the beginning of this journey, as far as you see it, where you, like, because this is pretty much your arc, it's in your head solidly, I'm just along for the ride, sort of like Pinky to your brain.
So first couple of things to note is that we're not describing a physical, cosmological, scientific description of particles moving out in space and all of that stuff. We're talking about a cosmology in terms of appearances, as it appears in a conscious mind, rather than as a descriptive of something out there.
And this idea of molecules, blah blah blah, that's all like kind of already a cosmology. That's a different one. Already given. So we're talking about the cosmology of the cosmology that creates cosmologies.
So the first diagram to drive that picture home, I think, should be the neurochemical operating system layers.
I wonder if I just have them here, because that would be a faster reference, but just at least for us, right?
Yeah. So I think our listeners should already be familiar with concepts like the strange loop to make some sense out of what we're saying.
Oh, that's a stretch, but I mean, it has to be. It has to be.
It has to be. So for the sake of brevity, I'm not going to go into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assume we know what they know what
that's marked up.
Our listeners would know what we're talking about. We have a marked up. Okay, well, I think
it may help us, but
what I need to for what I need it for, it's actually fine.
Yeah, just that way a bit.
There you go. Let's take these off here. So what I need it for, most people hear the word cosmology and assume we're starting in layer 1, right?
The particle physical.
But then but what we're talking about is when you go step through the neurochemical operating system built up the organism and its neural networking, the representational abstractions that appear in the abstract layer are actually are actually where the cosmology that we're discussing lies. That's the cosmology we're trying to tackle. So essentially we're the cosmology of the abstract phase space, right? So if the cosmology is of the abstract phase space, Portal Mountain is a specific map within that cosmology. That would be like the way to distinguish these two terms, I suppose. So,
right. Yeah, so it's interesting that we have particles and all that kind of cells and stuff, like these sciencey things that let's call it, say, the prehistoric or whatever person would never even think about.
Yeah. And
we're talking about something
we're totally not talking about that at all. Yeah.
Something that we would share with that primitive person, in that as we walk through the world, being this living being all put together, we are inside our cellular neural network is created this pattern which is meant to match that which is outside our body, because otherwise our brain wouldn't, the network wouldn't be able to function in its environment. That's the point of a neural network. Be
reflective of it. Yeah.
The point of a neural network
that's
is
the funhouse
to reflect the environment, right?
Exposition. The funhouse is another topic we should cover in more detail soon.
Right, and even down to the amoeba. So this is why we call it the neurochemical network, right? Running into an obstacle and having a chemical reaction cause the blob to move around it, right?
Yeah, like for example,
it's not even neurons, but it's a map, if you will, right?
Yeah,
so that's the cosmos of the amoeba, if you will.
A depression in its membrane causes a different electrical pathway to take through its cell body, stopping certain hairs from moving and increasing the movement of other cells so it turns, or something to that effect. It's a really cool it's a really cool way of mapping the world.
So in other words, within this membrane, there is that map.
Yeah, an environmental representation. So the neural stuff is just an extension of it into a more sophisticated network of information passing. Of course, I don't know who would want to deny that we all have nervous systems that allow us for exactly that. Take it a step further, that those representations have a more even deeper representation in terms of meaning and our storytelling and so on and so forth. So all of these things we know sort of intuitively. So we're not trying to like make a weird case for certain things that exist that nobody experiences. So anyway, let's drop into this new universe of abstract phase space. And why abstract? Because everything is an abstraction. Why phase? Because unlike your normal world out there where you measure things by its position and velocity, the only thing we can measure with any quantitative sort of appreciation is a phase from one moment to the next. So our awareness of any change whatsoever, right? Like you have a mental picture in your head, you've expressed it. Because of your expression, the mental picture in your head changes to that of that mental picture plus its expression out there already existing. For example, we are in a different moment in which I have already had said those words than we were since before I started. There have been changes in the entire mental structures.
So phase implies at least, I guess, the change over time. Something having multiple phases, that would mean directly that it has over time, in different time periods, different phases, right?
Right.
Different action.
And unlike straightforward, and it's not as straightforward as it will be again in the velocity in the physical sense, where you have, because you're in a position here in velocity, you can sort of predict. In this case, you can potentially predict, but you could also have an issue of synchronic shifts, shifting the underlying structure in a different way, so that the phase wouldn't. So if it normally would have phased this way, it just phases in a different direction.
So you're saying there are ways of linear understanding of the logic of the movement of, I guess, frames of perception, but that synchronically things can just shift without, like,
and with that,
unpredictably.
and that kind of synchronicity could basically say a specific tangent of phases gets sort of stored up for later and then interferes with a completely different train of narrative. Essentially, this is where we have the term hypernarrative pop up, because a narrative keeps plugging into other narratives that also share perhaps a moment between them, but phased in different ways into a different construct, and then having those constructs reintegrate into each other over and over again between oneself, between different people, and between groups, and more complex.
Right.
And
So I feel like, I don't know, like, is anybody understanding this right now? And how about the context? Like, where does this come from?
Okay.
What are we going to do with this cosmology?
So the context is, I was about to get to it. The other.
Okay. Sure.
So I wanted to bring the idea of space being a sort of like a static, momentary component, and a phase, which is a shift in that space. So this space shifts to that space, shifts through this space, shifts through that space. And this is how we get our line of time. Now, notice I'm using space and time as basic components. Now, this now gets us back into the discussion of archetypes. And so now we're pretty much done with this diagram. This is only to show that we're not trying to tackle the first layer, which is the physical and the particle layer, but rather we're trying to tackle the abstract phase-space layer, which deals with, for lack of a better word, chunking information, chunking phases of space together into different meaningful phases of its own volition.
Right, you're trying to build, and you're also trying to predict.
That's kind of the gist of it, but really, really the important takeaway is, we're getting into archetypal end, because the entire abstract phase space is also modeled through the archetypes.
So, like, moving up these, I guess, so which one are we at? So we can look at the center there,
So
right?
8.
Physical, biological, neurological, vestigial, symbolic, mediated. Is that what we end up using?
Mediational.
I guess.
Mediational,
yeah. Mimetic, abstract, spectacular, shared, diplomatic, cosmic. So we're in number 8, abstract. That's what we're talking about.
Right.
And this is I guess a layer of the neural operating system.
Yes.
So these are all layers, but these are the layers that we would most core assign to that, being starting with mimetic, abstract,
The responsibility for the abstract
concrete,
is you have
shared. That's not spectacular, it's concrete.
your ongoing operational mode. That's the mimetic layer. Like it's shifting from moment to moment to moment to moment, bringing together all the different memes that the artifacts have bubbled up from, right, and creates a memeplex, and that memeplex is the running of the put together program. Now, it doesn't know what's running. All it knows is that I have more signals to keep shoving through. What does it shove it through? What's a decision against which other patterns is it supposed to contrast them and develop them from, and so on and so forth, based on whatever patterns there currently are. So where's that information coming from? So that's the information you build up over time as you build up your conceptual framework. So as you get certain stimuli in a certain pattern, that's that.
Yeah.
And so if you get that repetitively, those signals become interpreted as part of that story. So that chunking of information into distinct categories of things, into types of things, is what this layer is about, and it's essentially thought of as a kind of a dead AI layer that is simply fed information, patterned information, and just grows itself through those through repetitive patterning, like a machine learning fashion. That isn't to say it is exactly like a machine learning without any further. But we're not.
Right. I was gonna say, like,
but we're kind of relegating those to different elements of the neural operating systems. It's not dealing with that.
This discussion is very interesting and kind of the word primitive comes up to mind, but
It's supposed to be, yeah. It's the basics.
when you're trying to maybe describe phenomenology to somebody, it's a very weird and strange, potentially awkward experience, right? So, like, I just want to acknowledge here that that's kind of we're starting
there, yeah.
we're starting at the very kind of close to, like, as beginnings as it can get, and it's kind of hard for people to latch on to any point at here. Like, we should have been, you could say, more careful to bring people into this, like, just even this session, like, into the point of what's this neural operating system, what's the difference between, you know, like, the physicality of it, what is a cosmology, what is being created, and oh, actually this is my meat inside of me that's creating a map of stuff. So what you guys are doing is actually describing that map.
Okay, so maybe what I should have done is backtrack to the hierarchy, right, and started off with the number of assumptions that we're making, and it's basically a really, really simple structure. We have our environment, we have an organism, we have an operating system that operates from within that organism, like its being, or is itself, which is why you'll see the neural operating system includes the entire physical layer all the way up to its shared stuff. And then we have the social layer, which is all organisms are effectively replicants of themselves, right? So there must be
You're
some kind
seeing
of
multiple.
so there must be some kind of reflection of that within the inner neurological structures about that
Yes.
that also correspond both to the environment that it's reflecting, but that environment containing replicants of itself as well. So it's a kind of like a complex loop of them being also part of the environment as well as being an emergent element out of the environment.
That's a funny coincidence, but Nick Land uses the term "becoming replicant" as and I think it's within this domain. Just a funny.
I've never heard the expression, so I couldn't comment. But yeah, to your point, the entire diagram that we just showed with the neural operating system actually contains is like a representation of one of those layers. So we have your environment, and then you have your organism, and then you have its operating system. So the operating system and the organism itself it's two layers, I guess. Consists of is considered to be the neurochemical operating system, all the way from its chemistry to its neural
Right.
Process.
Yeah,
So
in more
that's-
ways than one, it has to be, and it's only our mind could think that we are actually separated at some point with the heart problem and all that.
Yeah. So our interest doesn't not lie in any of those initial layers of the buildup of the organism that makes it up, but rather, once it gets to a certain point, its representation of itself and the various layers of its environment and
Right.
its operating system and its organism, physical
Right.
physical displacement, and its role as being a replication within the environment of similar things. So
Now,
that's the cosmos we're interested in. That representational cosmos.
right, and just an interesting point, we would say about the amoeba that it does have a proto neural operating system, including the entire layer spread, right? In proto terms, maybe not shared. Like I can't understand how.
Well, it will use ion channels to do stuff like move electrical signals around its body, much like a nerve.
Right, but I
cell
mean, do
does
amoebas
before it discharges to other cells?
and even social, because amoebas must be used to being in colonies together. Period. That must be their.
Or
environment.
even if they find each other tasty.
Sure.
That would be the secondary representation.
Yes. So yeah, even an amoeba has all these layers up there, and what we're concerned with is the layers in the top half, starting with 8, or wait, no, 7. Sorry. That's not the top half. I guess it is.
Yep, it would be.
So the top half. The ones where we're having representation of what's going on below, you could say.
So the mimetic layer is not of particular interest here because it's bare bones and it doesn't have like any kind of supplementary information. It's more of a mechanism than anything else to put information together.
Yes.
Which information it grabs
Yeah.
from the layers up top.
Exactly. So the information that's being actually
How to put it
processed,
together again comes from top.
in other words, the what we can change and do something about is in the abstract.
So one way to look at the abstract phase space is kind of like a junk drawer after every mimetic moment passes.
Everything goes there, yeah.
It just gets there, and then it will throw that information back into the next moment, and into the next moment, until it becomes its own pre-organized decision maker as to what gets thrown out based on what. And so you can have missing information, and you can have blank spots, and you can have all of the jazz that we tend to experience as we actually start to
Right. Okay.
think
So
irrationally.
I think we've almost introduced why do we call it the Portal Mountain Cosmology? Why are we interested in cosmology?
Mm-hmm.
The one thing I want to separate out here a little bit is cosmology we are associating with abstract in this moment. However, there's a cosmic layer,
The cosmic
which
layer.
sounds
The cosmic layer has more to do.
Sounds similar. So are we just straight up, we can ignore that?
So
it's
the
a different...
cosmic layer would be its parallel. Sorry, not parallel.
Mm-mm.
It wouldn't be its parallel,
It
but
can
the
be.
cosmic layer is dealing with the meta-narrative.
The diplomatic, as we call it. So the diplomatic would be the thing that we can change readily about, or the way we interact.
It's the immediate
or social
universe.
interaction.
It's the immediate universe, and the polyverse is where is everything else that affects it in a great mixture of.
Yeah, all the things that are not that, essentially.
Yeah,
and that.
So this kind of cosmic, first of all, I'm not entirely sure about that term. I haven't used it in a long time.
I know we don't.
We
haven't used it in a while.
What the difference would be is that if you were to take all of the different groups of like the guild or humanity or whatever, the entire species, if you will, the whole thing, that's like that's the human cosmos, for example, or the
yeah, I get it.
Like the overarching meta narrative of everything.
It's just, it's not a good term for that because it confuses with the
abstract. So that layer name has nothing to do with the cosmology we're trying to describe.
Right. Should probably note to self, unless it's probably still there. But definitely spectacular is concrete, right?
Yeah.
So that we've described what the domain is in kind of phenomenological terms that we're actually talking about adjusting here when we have myth, right? Mythology and all this. This is the building of the cosmos.
And one of its first
marker?
No, diagram.
Oh, which one?
Archetypes.
Okay. I may pull it up on the screen too, but let's see if we can.
So we've noted about the basic mechanism behind abstract phase space, and also the reason for keeping the name after shamelessly ripping it off. It's coming.
Oh, you see it?
It's right there. It's right there.
Oh, there it is.
After shamelessly ripping off Zumi of the name, we kind of invented our own definition for it, just using the terms in and of themselves for its explanation. So we're talking about abstraction,
like usual.
A space of abstractions that phases. One set of abstraction phases in, phases out, another set of abstractions phases in, phases out, and on and on and on, in a flash it goes. That's the basic structure. From that, we have our two.
That's the structure in terms of like a linear story, kind of in the terms of.
Well, as far as it's concerned, it's always going to feel linear.
Right, but what we're pointing at is that the construction itself, how it's like the pieces, the puzzle pieces coming together. Putting them moment to moment is kind of like the spectacular arrangement, right, through time.
Well, it feeds through the entire. At the narrative layer is when it stops looking like moment to moment. So Mimplex, abstract, and spectacle all operate on moment to moment to moment to moment. Mm-hmm. In the shared layer, where all of these moments are strung together into collective moments. So like imagine like if you take all of these moments, take another moment, and then keep throwing them together.
You're kind of summarizing them.
You kind of repeat a moment that keeps growing.
Like, let's say someone throws a baseball and then someone catches it. Well, you are watching it sail through the air, but all that was a baseball throw and catch.
Yeah. At the last moment, you have an entire representation of the whole arc.
Consolidation altogether.
Yeah.
Under that one, it was caught. Okay, good.
Yeah.
That was a catch, a throw, and a catch.
But that still is represented internally as a moment in those parts. That's the part that we normally don't think about as far as what thinking is, because we're already stitching the narratives and then using those as whole bits of information, and that is what the abstract phase space is literally responsible for. So the the momentary nature of that information, accumulation of it.
Better not be another wasp.
Anyway, We're now at the realm of archetypes, because one of the things that the archetypes were supposed to do is to take the idea of reducing everything to the most universal possible level of experience as far as we can muster. Like remove all of as much abstraction off of this sort of playing field, pretend it's like a fresh sheet of paper, call that the pure potential. And then sort of try to put a few archetypical experiential elements into this universal picture. So the idea of the absurd actually comes more like from order and chaos, and its dynamic. And so order and chaos are kind of archetypical experiences of I know what's going on, I don't know what's going on, or anything to that effect. It's not supposed to be a very complex philosophical
Okay,
point.
so let me just stop you right there if I may.
Signal and
We
noise.
went from talking about the structure as it is in a very kind of lucid psychedelic way of just this is what this meat is doing, and we jumped into now we're looking at what is the content of a specific layer of this meat, a way of organizing that meat to see its life, the life processes and the things around it.
Yeah, to sort of give it a template as to how to view it.
And so importantly, not necessarily just to reflect the meat, this kind of scientific breakdown that we just gave, not necessarily to reflect that, but to reflect what life is like living.
Yeah, with
like,
whatever plants you're with whatever animals you're with whatever people you're with whatever groups you're with whatever tools you have.
The spectrum of certainty.
Sure.
How do you like that?
That's pretty cool, actually, because if you remember, like the most primordial state is actually uncertain, and we borrow this a little bit from the physical representation of cosmology. And the reason is really simple. If cosmology itself is uncertain, there is no way to inbuild any kind of certainty back into it. So we're not going to start with that. We're going to admit a few things.
What do you mean?
Uncertainty is overlays all experience.
Yeah.
And it overlays all experience because the universe is primarily works on principles of uncertainty. Being in the universe, you work under the principle of uncertainty. That is a given and universal element
Right,
of
okay,
your
you're
abstraction.
saying that's a given.
I'm saying that's a given because the brain is made out of uncertain
Right,
parts.
right. And it's due to a number of weird things, like we're just a meat bag trying to reflect what's outside of itself.
Exactly. So
Which is inherently, if it weren't that, we would just be the universe itself with no meat bag, right?
Yeah.
And that's the perfect map.
So,
if you will.
Unlike with the external universe, we have another term called entropy, and that is simply to indicate that there is more.
So we're just walking up right now these, the archetypes, from uncertainty, entropies to space-time, etc. And before we even do that, couldn't you say, okay, order, chaos, and we have these four elements here. Should we not get into that first?
So I was thinking about that, and I kind of started going back up this chart because if you remember, development-wise, this column was the first development of this schema, and then some of these things were later reflections of the totality of it. So order and chaos will become more evident once we go through all the different layers.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. We just started stacking archetypes, I guess.
So yeah, entropy is another term that is talking about the fact that there are more nonsensical ways to represent things than there are sensical ones, and so there's always going to be a tendency towards nonsense, and therefore uncertainty is dominating. And with that, we come back to our space-time. Space-time is the archetype of experiencing the phases and shifts in space. Like, you don't really experience space without its shifting phases. It's not a static device that just stays in the state, right? So, in this experiential way, we have those experiences. Matter is what you experience as matter. Basically, that's
So space-time, I notice we're still
it's the
with...
solidarity of objects, basically.
Okay, yeah. Wait. So we don't have to be looking at the element here right now, going from time to decay.
No, no.
But
No.
yeah, so after entropy, the fact that most things aren't the working together, ordered. We go this space-time as this kind of like most fundamental seeming that people would think about. You wouldn't think about entropy or uncertainty. You just think about space and time. You know, if you're 4D.
And matter is a representation of that space and time, in terms of well, how is this space different from this time, from this space and that time, and so on and so forth. So it's a simple way of looking at the previous archetype in a new way. So space-time should be viewed by the matter that moves through it, right? Matter really only is viewed by the life that is interacting with it. A dead rock plus a dead rock is just more dead rock. There's no differentiation of different pieces of matter.
Also, I want to note here,
the phases of shift don't amount to anything.
because we're kind of doing a
Shifts of phases.
basic walkthrough, these are building on top of each other, and this is a common pattern we see even with going back to the neurochemical operating system.
Yeah.
They're building on, they depend on the plateau, if you will, of the previous to build using those Lego pieces to rearrange them into another new order, which eventually, you know, through time historically would emerge to a
Right.
plateau.
So uncertainty is just like a fundamental quality to everything, but it's expressed and witnessed through entropy. Entropy is
Right.
the thing that shows how uncertain things are, because of the combinatory what do you call it? Probabilities. There's more probability to go
Right.
the wrong way than there's the correct way.
Yeah, if you look at statistically speaking,
Yeah, this comes from that idea.
most matter doesn't just order itself.
And how do you experience this entropy? Well, you experience through space-time, and how space-time experienced through the matter moving in space-time. And matter is experienced moving through space-time through the life that is experiencing the matter moving through space-time. Now, there's a little bit of a disconnect on the build-up, at least in this description, because for one, life is just another configuration of matter, but it's the only configuration of matter that experiences death, right? The definitive element of life and versus matter is that it's a process in matter that emerges and dissipates while the matter remains, so to speak, right? And death is a consequence of life emergent. So you can't have life without death emergent right above that.
Right.
And so here we have our most abstract representation.
So again, before we move on, what this cosmology is doing is giving us the most general way of seeing the way that things are, that they map their shape. So in other words, this is what a neural chemical operating system should do with its abstract phase space, is order it in such a way that it can get a handle on this, because this is what's happening from our perspective.
And see, there's this isomorphism between the first three layers and the scientific way of looking at the world. It's not an accident, right?
First three layers?
These are not an accidental choice. These are the fundamental experiential elements of everything.
Right.
Entropy doesn't just apply to particles; it applies to thoughts. It applies to you know configurations of things. So, in general, it applies to configurations of anything, and thoughts is one such configuration. Anyway, the sense of space and time is how entropy is experienced. Even in the abstract way, we tend to look at our mental pictures as moving through time, right?
Now, okay, so we're not getting into elements. So
No,
we shouldn't be bringing that up right now.
No, we wanna wrap up the bottom section.
Which we kind of just did. But I just wanted to bring it home to note again that this is the Portal Mountain Cosmology, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Where more do we need to go after these? We've called these the primordial archetypes. What else is involved in the Portal Mountain Cosmology? What point do we need to make here? Like, what haven't we
that
gone
we have
over?
a few more layers to go by which we organize our mental picture. The first two should be obvious: animal and human. Animal being like our kin spirit of some sort that we can recognize as being like us, but we have the language to recognize it. They don't.
Wait. Okay. Hold on. That's a whole interesting discussion. But so you're thinking along the lines of basically, and what I was talking about is we need the purpose why this Portal Mountain Cosmology came up is because we're talking about organization of people together, and specifically expanding out our work so that more people can know how to interact with it, right?
So this would be like
you're
the
saying
first constituent elements.
we're talking primordial archetypes here. You're saying we can just reach to this work we've already done, personal, corporate, state archetypes, and this is the main matrix complex, whatever,
Right.
to put people through if they want to know, like, if they want to interact with the structure.
So sort of have this cosmology behave as like a common DNA, out of which even the structures that later on constitute the guild in the outer world follow this cosmology.
So my next question or point is
Or
that
represent it too.
I think that, so like with the offices, the corporate offices, for example, how to run a corporation, essentially our suggestion would be break your organization in, or not break, but represent it through these offices so that a full stack of representation of the archetypes can be there to filter your company through, sort of.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So your organization, so these 12 archetypes, corporate archetypes, offices, are there with your organization as its object, right? That is the object. That's the main object. There may be sub-objects and all that, but each sub-object is also going to be 12. You're going to have 12 ways of looking at it, correct? Like, we're talking about how to instantiate an organization in a kind of holonic manner. That's kind of the idea. In a way that there is no center per se, or no top.
That reflects the abstract space itself, and all of the common universal aspects of it that would transfer from me to you. Now, you have to make the jump a little bit here and understand that there is a separation going upwards here that is uniquely, how shall we say, human to itself. Like the distinction between animal, human, machine, fiat, corp, and state, sorry.
Yeah.
All of that, see, if you're at the level of the animal, none of those distinctions mean anything.
Okay, so if we're gonna, which we should continue on through the top half of this.
So my point there being is that we are in a unique we are in the unique human archetype that does
So-
need to have further elaboration, representation of higher level archetypes that
Hold on.
govern it.
Wait. Okay, the animal must be like I don't know. I'm just spitballing here, I guess, but it must be reflective of this neurochemical operating system. The animal has neurochemical operating system.
Mhm.
Any archetype before it does not.
Yeah, but what I would say is that the animal, for example, would not have.
I want to build with Lego
would not,
pieces.
Would
though.
not, yes, but it would not have like a concept of entropy, a concept of uncertainty. Well, maybe a concept of uncertainty, but not entropy. Maybe some rudimentary space-time, and none of it would be explicit, right? Like, so the jump between animal and human is the explicitness of all of these things, that they can in fact reflect them individually on their own as concepts.
Yeah.
And so because of that, there's a few more concepts
Yeah.
to reflect on.
Okay, so
we got to
I feel
animal.
like you've jumped like so fast and way ahead.
I didn't mean to, but what I'm trying to say is that
But I agree.
the mental framework of the human is that much more robust than the animal, that the animal doesn't represent any of the other archetypes really explicitly anyway. The human is the one that can and therefore should and must, in our sort of that's like what our argument is, should and must individually keep those all explicitly in mind, all the way up to itself, but also further than himself, in recognition of the technicalities of the world itself, what science gives us, and the machinery that it provides us with, and encompassing the true mechanistic nature of the outer universe that we inhabit. The concept of fiat, in that.
Whoa, wait, you kept going?
Yeah. Well, what do you need for the machine?
Man, you're like too
Well,
fast today.
Well, I'm trying to get through the.
Well, I know. But I just like I was waiting. I thought we were
You-
still
you
on
could al-
human. And
No,
you
no,
went
no, I
your
went to
machine to
machine.
fiat already. Okay.
Well, the machine is
I
simple.
thought I heard you say fiat.
I did say fiat
Okay,
because I
well,
was
then
done
we're
with machine.
already too. Like I'm waiting to get my edge in.
Say it. Well, you can interrupt me anytime, no problem.
Well, not really.
Sorry.
Not really, but I mean,
Go
this
for
is
it.
the dynamic here.
Go for it.
Sometimes.
Do it. Do it. I'm waiting.
As soon as I start talking, it's gonna happen. You're just gonna hit me with it. So, I wanted to say, like, I just want to, I guess, reiterate the difference between human and animal archetypes. The animal, which could be an amoeba, with its neurochemical operating system.
And they're archetypes. They're not definitions for what is considered scientifically animal and scientifically human.
Yeah.
We can have
This
animals
is
who are
a
human,
kind of
and
mythical,
humans who are animals.
mythical realm, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very much a
Necessarily.
categorical
Archetype. It's like this is Hercules. and
abstractions,
that's
all abstractions.
Moses and whatever.
Anyway.
So
The difference, the reason for having this abstraction. Yeah.
okay, so the what makes the human different, I think, seems like the folding onto its own self of that map onto the map itself, onto the map and the operatings, the gears, the mechanisms.
Yeah, to
Right?
have
To be able to self-reflect onto what that neurochemical operating system does.
and
right?
to
The
conceive. a
amoeba can't
representation.
change its mind, not unless through natural selection. Right?
It can create a representation essentially out of thin air, and keep consistently building it. Whereas with
Yeah.
an animal, it flexibly building it. Let me just say that. The real difference is not in the building of it, which a lot of mammals do, but the tendency to offload almost all activity into the learned domain. So the human is born more blank, and is required to acquire knowledge for its function, whereas the vast majority of the animal world is pre-prepped for whatever environment they're going to be
Right.
inhabiting. So the human is unique in that it doesn't come pre-prepped for any environment, but because it's doing the what do you call it? It's an externalization mechanism of taking it from the more physical implementation into a more neural implementation
Right.
of the same thing. That tendency to push almost every bit of our existence into it exacerbated by our
Sure.
computing capacity, for example, and writing and all of these different progressions that we
Mhm.
had since then.
Yep. Big
is
challenge.
what differentiates the animal from the human, but only from the human's perspective.
Okay, so what then? Let's move on to machine. So we've got that ability to make basically arbitrary maps of reality.
So the
And-
machine is really the archetype that represents the technical differences between concepts. So when you've externalized everything into the learned neural representation, the machine is what that representation looks like. It's like the gears of the processes that of the conceptual processes themselves. So when you say,
Okay.
so when you have a formula in your head, and you're seeing things moving, like the speed of light is
So a
is
machine to
changing
me
mass or
thinks
something.
like I think about input and output.
Right. So take each concept you know.
Now I'm imagining a
requires-
bunch of concepts all together, an input and then an output at the other end.
Exactly.
Okay.
The machine archetype is to denote that this is the representation.
So then
no
fiat
element.
is taking that
Machine.
machine as an item, an object.
Yeah.
In the cosmos.
And
or
fiat
whatever.
says when you put this input, you get this output, and then and so when in implementation,
Yeah.
in implementation, it's like
So
the
you're like
rule of law or
cataloging
something.
the machines as the law that can be depended on, and right. Okay.
So if you break the law by fiat, you need to be arrested.
So and this is like agreements, like business to business agreements. You know, I give you money, you give me this product, then I may take that product and do this with
Yeah.
someone else. These are machines interacting through fiat. Is that knowledge that this company does that when I pay them.
Yeah, it's basically the output of the mechanism. And so you can have fiat on a biological level, aka if you stress your arm too far, you will break your bones. That's like one radical example.
Yep.
But more often than not, when we discuss it, we're talking about the kind of machinery that comes from conceptual frameworks. So if I say, can you pass me that piece of paper, please?
No.
See, well, there's a demonstration of fiat in two different ways. I know you're playing the devil's advocate here.
I said no and I did, but I did it. What does that mean?
But the thing is that you said no, and I would have to take that on fiat. Like if you didn't give it to me, that would be on fiat. If you did give it to me, it's still on fiat. Your decision to give it to me
Whose
is
fiat? Whose fiat is greater, yours or mine? Well, it turns
there's
out
fiat
yours.
going both ways. There's fiat going both ways, right? Like,
I blinked.
and you illustrated an interesting point. Fiat is not a linear dependency.
And the relationship, it can be very disconnected.
This is our kind of intersection point with synchronicity, but should get to that later because it's a much more complicated subject, of which fiat is an integral component.
Now, I have a comment here. When we're talking about fiat, well, machines, fiat, all this kind of stuff, I think, like, New Age spiritualistic sensibilities would be like,
So,
that's the patriarchy,
if this is your machine,
or whatever.
if this is the machine you have, fiat says with that machine, from this input you get that output. If this is not your machine, that fiat is not relevant. So we need to make sure we understand fiat does not mean by force or anything.
Yeah.
It can, but it's not the point. Anyway,
It's
the hippies will say what?
Essentially, it's okay, yes. So it's a label. It's a label onto something, and we actually need these. Speaking about how to organize together in a society, we need these kind of regularities, this fiat, which means certain machines.
Well, you need it for logic. You need it for just thinking logically. You need it for thinking rationally. Because what is logic if not a formal system, a machine, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you feed that formal system inputs, it's going to generate outputs. Those outputs
Right.
are fiat.
Yeah,
You can't
so-
change it because that's your machine you're using.
I just wanted to step back a little bit and say, just point out that we're talking about a more generic process of the universe, if you will,
Yeah,
or of the cosmos.
and what we're saying is that part of our experience is the experience of fiat through a mechanical mean, and that's part of the experience of being
Right.
anything human
And
human and above animal.
so in a sense, this is more descriptive than prescriptive. Is that kind of what
Yeah,
you would
yeah.
say, something like that? Okay, so fiat, and then corporations are able to conglomerate themselves through collections of these pointers to machines.
Right. Right. It's just a layer of taking a bunch of fiat processes into a unit.
So,
As
actually,
with all things, it's the thing that brings people together.
now, I think that's, unless there's any other notes, what about state? We're then a collection of corporations in the same sort of way. Is
The state denotes the state of affairs. So not only is this your relationship to what is, but it's also a relationship to what is happening in some context. So the state ultimately dictates which corps go and do not, which dictates which fiats
Right.
are valid or not,
And
which
we never
dictates which
have-
machinery is valid or not.
we never get a full view of this, but this is like a tool to use, or not a tool. It's what this is supposed to be describing. What we do use to understand reality. Like, let's say I understand I have a local government for my city, who takes care of this and that, trash and whatever, and so the state you're saying is somewhat maybe outside of that understanding necessarily.
It's that understanding can be incorporated into the understanding.
You try to use that to get an idea of the state, but the state is always
The state is the state of things. A sense of the state. Are things going right? Are things going wrong? Is the machine working?
Right.
Is this fiat broken?
And being a cap here, we're talking about kind of visceral psychedelic existence in the moment of status,
Right.
right? Whatever, everyone has their own idea of what that status is.
Yes.
Right. We're not
It's not a prescriptive
talking
status.
necessarily about like government state.
We're not talking about class. We're not talking about status within society. We're talking about the state of affairs within a particular combination of factors with which humanity is involved.
Right. And then, of course, when we push over, there would be certain entities would presume to be that authoritarian, whatever, etc.
True. That's actually part of the reason why those words were chosen, because they also have that flavor to them.
Right. Like the king is the state. Like he is the affair.
Right.
There's nothing else. This is who
Well, we
you
have
are.
sovereign as our primary representation of
Right.
the state within the state archetype
Mhm.
itself. So, all
Yes,
of that,
indeed.
all of that is to basically try to paint a picture of the most bare bones, pure potential, without further interaction with the external universe. Like, say, taken completely out of context,
Right.
mental operating system.
And so
Of
this
conceptual operating
this
system, even.
can't be overstated. I think possibly that.
Sorry. The way to look at these archetypes is that we've talked about the APS, and this is to see the APS by the APS itself. So, in order for the APS to know or have a picture of the APS, these archetypes are the first step in order in trying to define what kind of picture we'll be looking at.
Right. This is the isomorphic way, as we would say, to describe the APS contents, to categorize the contents of the APS.
Or to start thinking of how it functions.
Um,
Contents-wise, it's slightly more convoluted.
Okay. And I was going to say, too, like, the one key point is that no matter who you are in what period of time or whatever, this sort of, like, you can take this sort of fuzzy logic from a God's point of view and be like, okay, this is that person's state. This is whatever corporations have come together to make that. These are the variables that this person thinks in this moment to create this thought, this idea of the world.
The mythology, basically.
That there's all this fiat, like certain ways. This symbol means that, and these are really describing machines.
That's the mythology.
And the machines standing on something that's able to create machines, so dynamic in its mapping, which is standing on top of the animal, which is the human that we are.
So another way to look at machine is actually using the word spirits. Right? With fiat being like the universal rules by which spirits function. With corp being like your different factions of your gods and whatever as they existed. With the state being being the state of the world in which these
it's like
gods
a pantheon.
interact.
And the modern atheist doesn't think of the professionals as their pantheon, right? And the corporations.
Yeah.
But that swaps in perfectly. These are your gods, basically.
Spirits, gods.
You worship them by sacrificing your body as capital to obtain more capital to sacrifice.
Well, that's a little bit farther.
Okay.
The relation. I will comment on this. The as far as we know, the pervasive relationship between the spiritual world and the human world pre-civilization is not of higher or lower status. The spirits and humanity were sort of in this mess together, and they suffered as much as we did. And
The spirits?
Yeah.
Where are you getting this myth from?
This is generic attitudes of people, but this particular information.
I didn't know that. That's pretty badass.
This particular bit of information came to me from
God.
looking at it from the Norse perspective.
Yeah.
One of the things that they believed in is that you could hurt gods as much as they could hurt you through whatever spells and incantations that you would invoke. So so it mattered how you spoke to them, and it would have been back and forth. Obviously, after Christianization and all of that relationship shifted towards a more dominant perspective, especially as clan leaders, or not clans, war leaders got really, really big and rich, and well, it was a warring culture, so they got accustomed to riches quite quickly, and then Christianity erased the whole thing, the whole concept of that thing. But anyway, the equality was much more evident in the attitudes of people.
Very interesting.
So I just wanted to point that out.
We've got this stack. This is our generic cosmology. And where do we go from there? What are we going to do with this?
So, from here, we've established a kind of a picture of how to think of the potency, of the pure potentiality of the APS itself. There's a few templates called archetypes that we can use to view through the lens of the mental picture. The way to view that is that they all happen at once, and they exert a kind of an effect, a causal effect onto the picture, dictated by the contents of the picture itself. So uncertainty will be based on results of what's happening, entropy being the not an instance, but kind of like the ongoing story of whether shit's fucking up or shit's not fucking up. Both sides are from the entropy perspective, where and when it happened, with what, and like the entire tapestry of who lived, who died. Do we need any animals? And any of those things.
Do we need animals?
Do we need concepts? Animals could be, again.
I didn't get what you just said. You're
an,
jumping through life. You almost got to death, and then you just said, "Do we even need animals?"
I just meant. So again, these being archetypes, an animal is a concept. A beast of burden, or a aloof friend. I don't fucking know. It doesn't matter. Some people are animals. It's all in how you interpret what's happening.
Um, yeah, there's a big discussion here, I think, about crystallization. What do we call it?
I just-
reification. The
Yeah.
animal is in a permanent reification mode, but the human can come down to that.
Yeah.
The human can do that too.
Yeah,
Because we can do anything.
I think we should stop with the primordial archetypes there, though, and not go further, except to establish that this is one of the primary constituents that we can further elaborate on
Yeah.
different discussions if necessary to build up.
So
on.
what do you mean? Like, don't go into personal, corporate, and state right now? or-
Yeah, I
saying we
didn't
avoid?
want to go there because we come to a different. We need to go this way now. So
Well, okay. Okay.
So, one visually you can see that there is a bottom half which ends at death, and a top half which starts at animal and ends at state. Right?
Yep.
So from there we can start to kind of understand where we're going with the concept of order and chaos. The reason is that uncertainty, entropy, and space-time being all uncontrollable, matter being what it is, life being spontaneous, and death following in its footsteps, all of these things are entirely non-plannable and non-decision. They don't rely on conceptualized thought whatsoever. Right? These are just like the processes
Yeah.
of the world as
Well,
is. There's no...
There always is that order being somehow injected, but
It starts here.
um,
That order is defined in these places.
yeah. So we would have to like think about how does that connect with these, then.
So
'Cause if we have like project management here and chaos.
so chaos is basically like the unprescriptive what is happening, with order being how chaos is organized into its own little domains of existence in various
Right.
different discernible ways
It's
that could be
more,
conceptualized.
It's also a more abstract thing than with the chaos being concrete. Does that seem to make sense?
No, because we're talking about flipping. Don't worry about
Okay.
it.
Okay. Yeah.
Don't worry about it. We'll get it.
Mhm.
We'll get there.
That's
another.
a flip.
There was it was in fact the result of a flip too.
We like flips though.
So the point being actually here is that all of these states of order that we are seeing at the top, as they get far more abstract and whatnot, are entirely dependent on the configurations of what's found in chaos. So chaos is not chaotic because there's something bad or wrong with it. Chaos is just not the lack of recognition of any order out of its constituents.
Right.
And the recognition of order comes from recognizing animal, human, machine, fiat, corpse, state. Like even if we're talking about life and death, for example, right? We're talking about animals or humans. Even if we're talking about matter, we're talking about which machinery it's part of, right? Space-time, again, machinery. Entropy.
I have a feeling that most people would understand the association of time with chaos. Just because if you think about like primordial time and like, the Big Bang and all this kind of stuff, right?
I know.
Before
Yeah, no, I
this
agree
is a
with that.
very easy step for people, I think.
So yeah, but that's kind of going back to the elemental, which we didn't tackle it. We're still at order and chaos, and really the point was being that chaos is just unordered constituents of what could be order. It's just a matter of how.
Okay,
it's
I
just a
mean,
matter
like
of
I got the chart up there. I thought we were just moving
It's just
to
a-
the left, but okay.
No, it's
so we're
just,
skipping chaos.
it's really
chaos in
just a
order.
matter of. Oops. It's really just a matter of which machine's lens we're looking at our chaotic worldview, and then from that point we are recognizing our animals, we're recognizing our different materials, and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Now, To get this even more convoluted, because
Convoluted?
convoluted, because as if we haven't done so already, this situation is essentially absurd. Chaos is order, order is chaos. Everything is entirely uncertain, subject
Right.
to entropy.
Yeah.
The state of affairs is effectively can be considered absurd to the highest degree, despite the fact of being as ordered as possible in some smaller context. Negative entropy. But
I
that's-
think this is also understandable for people. Chaos, the idea of chaos and order. The stack that we've just gone through, this whole primordial archetype stack, starting with uncertainty and chaos, like I think people could probably pretty easily connect that.
Yeah.
So we are talking, and we have the yin yang there. I was gonna mention,
So
so beautifully drawn, which is basically the same concept, right?
mhm.
And these whole ideas of like you see it in so many spiritual systems of like kind of the divine feminine, the divine masculine, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on that sometime later to talk about mythology, but this is
Yeah.
a little bit before that. So, order, chaos, the absurd. We've basically touched on how to think of chaos and up to which archetypes that's relevant to, and likewise with order. So, part of the reason our cosmology makes such liberal use of the words chaos and order is because it's reliant on the understanding that we're talking about in the archetypical stack, that it gets more ordered out of chaos as it climbs. And all of that has to be taken into consideration all at once, but different templates to look at things. So sometimes it makes sense to look at things as machines or humans or animals. Sometimes it makes things to look at things more in terms of order and chaos. Sometimes it makes sense to mix and match. And sometimes all you get is absurd. So, all you get is absurd, and you don't get a differentiating, satisfying answer out of anything. And that is the basic mental picture of the pure potential APS. The rest is content, if you will, and that content, I guess this is when we need to discuss elements. That content appears in space throughout time, and it consolidates and decays as time shifts, or the phases shift. So that's the entire point of that particular stack. Consolidation is seen in animal and humans and then machines, putting things together. Decay is seen in matter, in life, and in death. Matter constantly shifts phases, it annihilates itself, and all of that kind of stuff. Life spontaneously arises out of not out of nowhere. And then death ensues further on.
Cool. So do we have the cosmology yet? What are we missing? Is that it?
No, we don't have the cosmology yet because we have just touched on the primordial archetypes.
Right.
The most primordial of the primordials. To continue our journey, we are going to take a field trip.
Field trip to the past?
A field trip to dreamland. Should have gotten more prepared.
So people generally would have, everybody has a like we could call this like a core cosmology. Like you're probably almost never would think about cosmology. Like you wouldn't think about this. This isn't even the content of normal cosmologies. This is like the generic cosmology that can be used to describe any cosmology, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I forget, of course, what point I was trying to make there, but that is interesting. That it's a sort of esoteric sort of thing, naturally hidden.
could be applicable to actual quantifiable descriptors as well.
You know, most people would.
I mean, the first three are meant to be.
Like, let's say most people just don't even understand uncertainty at all,
Right.
and have and actually literally apply, in other words, through reification. Like, this is what reification is. Apply a certainty to what something is, or what an object type is, right?
Yep.
That's a failure right off the bat of the core of cosmology theory, right?
Mm-hmm.
The most primordial.
Because the problem there, the uncertainty comes from the representation.
Right. So, and
Which-
it's all represented.
And if we need to actually dive deeper into it, then I will put the blockers right there.
So-
it's the incompleteness theorem that talks about representation, and it's failing to either
Right.
encompass everything, or starting to become self-contradictory. So you will face uncertainty one way or the other, either through incompleteness. Oh, here you go.
Yep.
This is better.
Oh, nice. Without the yin yang.
Yeah.
Damn.
This is probably something you would want. So
Yeah,
for
so-
this, I'm just.
So this is
skimming
the
through.
I think the importance of cosmology comes out here, and just even in that comment, reification is a massive problem with consciousness today. It is, you could say,
It's one way.
the problem. Like, it is the worst thing that's happening is over reification and under
In a single
experience,
direction, a reification in a single direction.
unexperience, just a complete, as Fisher would call it, something like the throwing in the garbage of sensuality, avoiding of sensuality.
Here's how I will describe it in model speak. The problem is with trying to reify the fundamental in the significant instead of trying to reify the significant in the fundamental. So it's going up one way. We are killing our significant layer by it becoming a pure representation of its fundamental quanta. And you can sense this from the outflow of meaninglessness in society. Like everything is becoming less meaningful, right? And that's because it's becoming more and more part of the underlying mechanism. Where up until civilization itself, it was the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
It was trying to reify parts of the fundamental layer in terms of our significant layer. So this is where you get trees of spirits.
This
is where you get. Sorry. But this is where you get like your spirit, your tree spirits, your water spirits, your sky spirits, right? Like you're reifying
Sky
the world around you
spirits.
in terms of your own mythology rather than the way we're doing it now. That isn't to say there's no value to what we're doing right now, but without the former process, we got our breakaway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a problem of not uploading.
Uploading you mean updating, in other words, updating the top layers.
And the only thing that it gets updated is with more crap from the bottom layer without anything to itself. And so obviously it's losing its soul, self-coherence and self-meaning, becomes disoriented and
Yep.
only relies on.
So typical.
So, I got my diagrams. And the next one we need to jump into
Is take a break.
is this beauty.
Oh no. I'll have to pull that one up on my desktop because.
Yeah, you do that. It's too small to read, but it's okay. Like the box is.
But people know. Y'all seen this before. I don't even know where it's on a desktop.
Yeah.
But anyways, like
Load
it's
it
there.
up.
You can carry on talking about it if you want.
No,
I'm gonna
load it
load
up.
it up.
We'll take our break. No problem.
Just probably one of these on desktop. No. Diagrams. Sounds promising.
That's one of them.
There's a part of it.
Actually, that's the part we want. No.
Well,
Both of them.
We might as well have the whole thing. And this is called the memeplex cycle, or no, that's a different chart. What do you call it? The narrative cycle? What is this one? The big chart. We just call it the big chart. It has everything in it. And it's not here. Oh, it's this, because you can't see it. It's like, it looks like white. The thumbnail is just a white piece.
Yeah, we'll just zoom in and...
Da-da-do-do-do. Don't forget. Where did we go? Where did we go?
Yeah, just leave that on the screen. Zoom in further.
On what?
Beautiful.
On what?
Anything.
All of it.
Just so you can read most of it.
Yeah.
Stay there. Okay.
Nice. Nice. Yep. Anyways, so with that, we're going to take a short break. Brr, 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 brr. Or should I leave it on that screen?
Well, that screen's fine.
Okay. Alright, peoples.
mean, criticism is fine.
It's called a dev meeting for a reason.
Yeah. What I'm saying is criticism itself is fine, but it has to be based on actual informed understanding rather than a potentially misinformed one. And the criticism of this doesn't make any sense is not a criticism. It's a comment. Or a statement. So, how shall we proceed? Well,
So I was just noting too off stream that it's interesting how we're basically describing reality in a way. So like for anybody watching this is why we kind of tried to take care at the beginning to like try to give at least a way of getting a foothold into this, right?
yeah.
And you have to kind of have an open mind sort of in a way that this is titled as a development meeting, right? Like we're not just telling the truth, quote unquote. We're not giving the truth to you.
No, we're building a model specifically meant to be mental gymnastics for mental gymnastics. So to become equipped, understanding, and skilled at the mental gymnastics that your mind will go through anyway, and what to do with that as they happen.
Right.
So it's never going to be about not doing mental gymnastics, but just knowing their actual contribution into the real flow of your moment-to-moment, so to speak, existence. That's about it, right? So with that, since it is mental gymnastics about
it's
mental
kind of a bad
gymnastics.
word. It's sort of a bad word.
No,
a
I
little
know.
bit.
But I just wanted to make it clear for anybody who would come and say, "Yeah, this is all just a bunch of mental gymnastics." Well, exactly, about mental gymnastics to model mental gymnastics themselves, right? So it's not a matter of just like leaving it at mental gymnastics and saying, "Have a nice day, just do your mental gymnastics." It's more like, well, no, they're going to happen.
Yeah,
And nobody
this is
knows
like
how
a classic,
and nobody knows what to do with it.
classic kind of thing.
And yeah,
Like, oh, what if it's even worse and they come to you and call you what you're doing mental masturbation? That's even worse, right? But then, what is the
well,
the
you
response?
can call it that, but then you'd be wrong.
We actually we have a spectrum which describes that, right?
Masturbation has a bad name because you're basically putting a potent ingredient of the universe into a bin bucket or a sock. Right. That's like why.
Here we go.
So to suggest that what we're doing is just like throwing hot air into absolutely nothing and
Right.
wasting our time mentally.
Yeah, no, that is actually,
That's
like
actually,
kind of ultimately.
that's actually fundamentally
the ultimate
incorrect.
insult. We'll just our faces will turn
Well,
red.
no, it's not an insult. It's not an insult. It's perfectly and demonstrably wrong.
Right.
If
Which
if
is,
it
yeah.
was mere that, it would be no actual
Yeah,
consequence
well,
to
it's like,
it.
well, if you want to use that as a metaphor, okay.
And if the consequence is not going to be measured by whether we
Let's-
get this book out or whether we ever finish
Right.
articulating the model, it's going to be in its applicability and its effect on our own lives. So we're not going to bother with that.
Yeah.
To call it that is just entirely misguided.
Well, I mean, that's such a. This is like the hardship of the so-called messiah complex or whatever, like to be feeling like awakened or seeing stuff deeper into society's problems and like what can possibly help that. You kind of can take that onto yourself, right, as like an identity, and which can drive you and drive your body into the ground, right, as a sacrifice. But still, that ain't healthy, right? That kind of thing, obviously. But I mean, there's that balance at the same time. Like, well, this is my hobby, basically. As far as like having other hobbies, like, you know what I mean? Like my free time, I give a lot of free time to.
I don't discuss this to
Like
convince.
this subject of Portal Mountain, right?
I don't discuss this to necessarily convince anybody of anything. I discuss it because that's all I see. That's how I see it. I'm expressing what I'm seeing, and all I care for is to produce some form of an expression
Right.
without without any further consideration to like others. It's not about others. It's this is something that I want to express, and that's the end of it. So
Right.
another
Yeah.
So that accusation can
I mean,
appear.
and what is accusation
It does.
anyways? It's nothing but criticism, nothing but being critical. It's not creating the new. It's being lodged in the old. It has no bearing on anything, right? Really,
Well-
if you want to think about it that way, it's pretty
a
easy.
short gap measure to put a label on something so that other interpretation of it go filter through the category.
Like, I mean, too, you don't want to get triggered, so to speak, offended, and throw away a potential opportunity for conversation, right? Like, you would use the word, hang on the metaphor, oh, masturbation. Okay, well, what would that mean if this was a philosophical system? What would the difference between masturbation system or non-masturbation, right?
If the only output out of philosophy is books, and that's it, if that's the only output out of philosophy,
Right.
how
And
is
this
it?
is-
How is it not mental masturbation?
Spectrum of stupidity, right?
So this is a subjectivity spectrum question, but it is itself the spectrum of stupidity. You're correct.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we should go to that side because that's cameras works better. So we're pulling up the big chart.
Big chart. All right, let's get that phase space more centered.
Okay, I'll be technical operator here.
Well, no, zoom out a little. It's too much. There you go. All right. The abstract phase space.
Yep.
Now, you'll notice there's an encompassing circle that encompasses the abstract phase space, narrative, meta-narrative, and hyper-narrative,
All of it.
and calls all that the cosmos.
So we have model.
Yeah.
Where is the label cosmos?
Up.
Oh, it's going to be in here.
No,
Or-
almost.
Oh, over here, but so that's for
Like the big ass circle, like
that's why it's
encompassing
in there.
everything.
Okay, that little label.
Yep.
And it's interesting how you, of course, put it right here next to APS,
APS
even though it's talking about the
and
whole
moving.
thing.
Well,
And again, we have the isomorphism loop here. This is out to the psychedelic realm of reality,
so model means modeling this.
right?
So the arrow means that if you model this as it becomes an isomorphic artifact inside of the phase space.
Right. Okay. So how are we connecting? We were just talking about primordial archetypes.
Right,
and
which is a conversation relegated to this circle. If you notice, that is the entirety of the abstract phase space. It has the unmoving, ready to go programs to feed into the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So these little machine chunks.
Little machine chunks that keep getting updated by the decay of the meta narrative into sound bites, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the same idea. This is also can be, the squares can be also thought of sound bites.
Right. And you're just talking about the ongoing flow of experience kind of feeding back into pattern recognition, essentially.
Right.
Like if you see the same thing happen many times, it's going to be kind of like a path walked in a forest.
Mm-hmm. So your
That's
entire
where you go.
worldview picture in this situation decaying into these bits of information. Recategorize. So it's your database. That's why I call it dead. It's not the living part of it. The
Right.
living part of it is when you move over to the narrative portion of the cosmos. See, cosmos constitutes both the full narrative spectacular ongoings,
Right.
and
we
spectacular
have that here?
ongoings through the memeplex. This is the memeplex moving
Okay, so
through
we're
itself,
looking at memeplex moving through.
moment by moment.
And you're relating that to APS?
So let's start with the picture. We have our disconnected bits of data, our sound bites. They are very abstract in nature, so we can't really classify. We can't really talk about them in terms of their content, because it could be anything. But you can talk about the way that content can come into play with the rest of the content. And so the important bits here are actually something that I borrowed from programming, because programming is a great way to capture representation
Of course.
through
Naturally.
through very mechanical means.
The monitor.
I'm not by no means am I saying that this is a complete system, nor is it really relevant to the discussion at hand. But a few things about it should be pointed out, just to kind of see some of the things it could be doing. So the picture I like to draw comes from the programming world again, is the building of various disconnected sets of statements that could be said, interpreted in a variety of different ways within larger statements, as part of the statement, as part of the subjects of the statement, part of the properties of the whatever subject, and so on and so forth.
So you're getting into programming gobbledygook here with the space?
It's mostly for its descriptive
type, aspect, that stuff, or yet, or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's happening here is that we take our generic looking squares, the individual bits of the information stored in our database of abstract phase space that's shifting all the time, and actually place them into a
And this is an
configuration
interesting unit.
into a
The
configuration
way this
for the
is being
moment.
represented as a block, when actually it's like a path walked in a forest, right? Like, just many things, how they all come together, and that's the
But
kind of
captured by a
basis.
label or something to that effect, or by a
Right.
symbol, by one whole symbol that captures the entire idea. That's really what.
But
the
then you
point
need to
is.
go and use this idea in context.
Exactly,
right?
to unpack it.
And so,
So
you've got
we're
your
looking
type.
at we're looking at unpacking all of our little sub informations, and we unpack it into, first of all, into space itself. You see that, the encompassing circle?
Space.
Right.
The final frontier.
Exactly, because everything happens in space. So
Yeah.
we're just taking that information and laying it out in a specific way. So the first thing we're doing is we are creating the subjective context, the full-blown context, and that is actually not as simple as it sounds, because think about for a moment of walking into a building, then walking into its washroom. It's like, switching from room to room, but you're still inside the building, but you're still inside the street, but you're still
Right.
and you're in such a proximity to the car,
So
you can
yes,
still
yes,
you can
yes.
still use your key.
So what we need to think about this little part of the diagram is that this is your current context based in layers of space, right?
of context, of other context,
And space being those things like, this is an office, or this is my office, or I'm in the McDonald's restaurant, and now I'm in the washroom. Why would you be there? I don't know.
But think about, like, sitting in the McDonald's, your car is outside the window, and you press the alarm key or the lock door key.
Sure.
Right?
That's better.
Then think about you being two doors down the street and doing the exact same thing. Right, like so now you have parallel context, and that parallel context is also affected by
So
distance.
can we just quickly talk about the fundamental structure here? Because I'm imagining
Nesting.
the car object itself is having a status, a property of locked or not. If it's not locked, we're into a protocol now here. Take
So-
this object and press the button until you hear the beep. Okay,
So
that's a protocol.
subject-
Now we've just
so
nested a
I'll give it
protocol
to
in.
you. I'll give it to
Okay.
you.
Okay.
So the subject is activated first and foremost. So you activate a subject, and then within that the activity happens.
So by activating means bring it into the space.
Yeah. So the first thing that has to happen in any given full build out of this is the underlying active context that presumes everything.
And this
Ideally,
is
that's your meta narrative.
This is the space of space. We're talking about just the planet Earth and how its matter is arranged and how we think of it. So
Or
I'm
whatever the
I'm in a
domain is.
washroom, but I'm also in a building, but I'm on...
It's more like a domain. Like in the domain
Okay.
of a workshop, your space is the machinery of the workshop.
Well, yeah, okay. So to get... Nobody's thinking in
And
terms
you-
of
and-
Earth, the planet.
And your
I'm on
supply,
planet Earth
and it's
now.
more like your suppliers and your materials and all of that.
But I'm just
stuff.
trying to bring it back to like the physical kind of... That's,
Yeah, no, physical. That just as a simplified example, yes, but you got to go way more abstract past it. I guess is my contention.
I mean, we're intersecting with reality, with concrete here. We're
Yes.
intersecting with the concrete.
Physical space is the easiest way to imagine this, especially when you think about nesting. The other thing I want you to realize is that activation can happen in parallel. So you can have multiple active contexts in parallel,
Right.
not nested in each other, but nested in some form in one, and that overreaching context is the way they all communicate.
Well, even having different roles to play in a single area.
Exactly. So imagine you being a son, a brother, a husband, and a woodworker, CNC operator, and all of these things, right? Like, those are all parallel contexts that have you at the base of it all. And depending on, like, they can be all active at once, they can be some active and some not, and that, like, will totally affect what the final sentence will come out of your mouth, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is a
So that's
simplified
what you mean
example
by
as I can
activate and
imagine.
almost... Is there a deactivate then?
Yes. Stack up, stack down.
Right, yes, and you're just bringing things into your world at the time they're needed.
Right.
And this is what the NOS is doing as it moves through space and time to its environment.
But imagine all of this happening really, really, really fast, and you're nesting context into different ones, and then what was parallel is now nested, and what was nested now has now become parallel, and it just like becomes this really, really, really crazy ass psychedelic bubbling up
Mm-hmm.
thing.
Right.
Now we go into what's inside the subject. And this is where you have the different enumerated categories, the types.
Types.
Yeah, so you'll have a collection of types at play. Types are conceptual groupings, right? They define the attributes of whatever objects you're trying to describe. So by categorizing something as a type, you know how it'll behave.
Well, you're sort of setting up like some kind of pinball machine wherever you're at and then let the ball drop. So it's like you're waiting for inputs, sort of. You're just say that's what this is like a whole systemic
Right.
description.
So the purpose of subject in this scenario is to say that each subject brings with it a different interpretation of what types are, including but not limited to merging types together, splitting types apart into two different types, and so on and so forth. So creating a really complicated picture. Right. So every time you layer on a subject, or every time you have a subject activated in parallel, what the type means is going to mean different things for the involved picture. And the aspects are basically, well, now that you have descriptors for the properties and of the things that are there, how do these properties interact and being in the same space? That is again made more complicated by switching the switching of subjects.
And you're pointing at the relationships here
Yeah,
with aspect. Whereas
Exactly.
type are just
they are the boxes.
and they're interpointing.
They're interpointing because their attributes are expressed by types. right? So when you have a type, its attributes will be explained by types.
Yeah, by others.
Right.
Mhm.
But then with the meaning of those attributes
In other words,
in
properties.
the subject, the meaning of this attribute in the subject in this type is determined by the aspect. So the subject brings it along with it not only the types it's interested in, also the way those types interact. So
And
every
subject,
time
you're talking about like different, let's say, role. You take a different role.
yeah.
Change
So
your
every
role.
time you switch subjects, you know,
Where
you're
is subject labeled on here, or what? What do you, like? Oh, up here. Okay, so we didn't look at those.
yeah, it starts to look at all the inner concentric circles.
Okay.
It's the consent. Everything happens in the circle, so that's this. Everything happens in the subject. There's subject
Mhm.
activation going on. Types
Right.
and aspects are dependent on which subjects they're in. Now, to make matters far more worse,
Yeah, subject. How does that link in, like somewhere else? Like, subject seems like, say, putting on a different hat.
mm-hmm.
Whatever. So you're one time you're a project manager, and then now you're a janitor
Specific exactly
for the
that.
same space.
Yep, that's exactly the right correct way of thinking about it.
Okay.
Or stepping through.
And
a
those
building.
are really types of subjects are types of things themselves. Okay, that's where it connects in.
So you see here, I'm saying H square is interchangeable with subject, with aspect, and with type. So this square can become the
Yeah,
outermost
okay.
space, and this is
Yeah.
what makes the entire picture even way more
Yeah, I don't
convoluted.
think you
Like everything gets interchanged depending on the
I
context.
don't
in
think
which
you
it's
ever
appeared.
said that to me before.
I
but
tried to.
Okay.
Believe me, I tried.
You tried.
Yeah, but this is what it's pointing to. Like the square can become any one of these things, either an aspect, either a type, either a subject, and that's what's denoted by that note at the bottom, plus with the arrows going to the other constituents. And then when we describe subjects, they encompass the system that way. So all of this convoluted thing to say is that not only do we have the archetypes limited to here, which
yes.
means they give impressions as to what these things are and their relationship to every other
squares.
things. Right?
I have to
Now
narrate
we
your
have.
pointing. I have to narrate your pointing for people.
Oh,
who
sorry,
can't see the
sorry. Yeah,
pointing.
I'm pointing because I forget that I am not live. Yeah, so abstract phase space squares. Not only are they essentially templated with the so to speak.
This is where like everything that
Mold of
everything
the
that
archetypes.
everything that can change. This is where it changes.
Yeah.
Over time. The other layers in description with the NCOS, those do not change over time. They remain the same.
All of
the
this.
APS is where everything changes. That's why it's a focus. In many cases.
That's
right?
really quite correct. But it's such a dead system subject to the other ones that how it changes is extremely
Yeah.
up to itself. Almost, it's almost alive, but it's actually besides the point.
Mm-hmm.
It's what you put into it is a garbage dump.
Right.
But going back to this, what are we doing with all of this? Well, what we're trying to demonstrate here is like how is content actually making its way into changing the nature of what is getting fed back into the system, right? So what are we composing out of all of this such that it makes sense of the sense information that we get so that we
Right.
can put something back into this APS.
Yes, you're making a very valid and interesting and deep point. Maybe like very deep because the level that this can go to, if you process the right artifacts or whatever you could say, is like complete transformation of the whole system, like the whole structure.
Mm-hmm. That's actually the point of talking about this model. It's, if you'll note, I'm making the point in this diagram to say that to model this is to put an artifact about this into the system so that the system
Right.
itself could shift to contextualize and activate the correct subject based on this artifact instead
Right.
of the other ones.
I like how you said the correct subject. The subject which realizes this model to some degree.
And not just
even the subject of faith or whatever, right?
and not just conceptually, but in action, with wordlessly. And yes, faith in action is to allow oneself to see whether this is correct, and see the feedback of that, and notice it happening. Now, what we need to notice happening is the extreme unreliability.
Fisher said something the same, by the way.
The extreme unreliability of what is type, what is aspect, and what is subject. Because the point we're making here is that these can shift on you so quickly without even without batting an eye, that we don't notice this. It all gets integrated into the next point of narrative.
Right, because we're looking at it with a model using a rationalistic sense, when in fact it's like as easy as footsteps walking through a forest in order to create a path. Was it hard to make that path? No, people just walked through it.
We're trying to look at this whole picture by what's given to us here. So if we're
Pointing at the three boxes in the space.
the three boxes and how they connect to each other, by what's given to us here. Not only is that thing given to us fiat wise, we don't choose it, what's given in this circumstance. The task is to try to assert this entire structure out of what we're given there, which literally makes a task seemingly impossible, given that content won't just accidentally stumble into it, right? There's another creative method that has to happen in terms of trying to lay out these phenomenological instances and capture them into some words that connect to each other, which was what this model is for, trying to capture this picture and connecting all these words to each other so that we can be fed back into the artifact.
It's like an art trying to upload the model into the guild, uploading the guild.
It's an extension that would be an extension of this. It's the same process a layer higher.
We're uploading the guild. I think that's one of our primary objectives, you could say.
If you look at this as like the constituents of a myth, it works the exact same way. The myth is self-sustaining in these particular ways by throwing out stuff onto its ground and seeing what comes back. Anyway, the point of
what myth? Wait.
I'm just saying that you can look at this as what's happening in your mind, but you can also look at it as what's happening in the social mind.
Right.
You can take this up and down layers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But that's not the
For
point.
sure. Yeah, and that's where we were just going with this. The fact that these are artifacts, others can read them and listen to, and have conversations about this model with us.
Right. So this is applicable between one person, between two people, one person to themselves, all of that. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. But it is a very meditative diagram, because we're having like this cycle of moments.
Mm-hmm.
We have the spectacle here, where all that APS and space stuff is filtering through, in and out, phasing in and out, but over time.
So let's unpack this more. Oops. What we're noticing, first of all, what I want you to notice is that only the squares out of the whole aspect here make it back to being constructed into a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Now, squares represent complete units of data about the information. So what I mean is like it's the things that appear in space that were interacting, right? So the things that were capturable by representation that appeared in the phase. So you set up the context, you set up the way to look at the things. Now that you're looking at the things, all you see really out of the entire construct, the foreground, if you will,
is the structure,
is the final bit of product that this all constructed to move the needle slightly ahead to the next moment. So, which means condensed.
I'm tripping out already, man.
It's me saying the same thing I said before, in that you have to use what's given to you here to even try to map all of this out, right? You're limited. You're limited into the end result, to your
so
end product. This is just the output.
You're circling around space. This is kind of implying that this is where you are.
No, I'm circling around inside
what you have.
I'm circling around the innermost.
Yeah, I wish like the hand
subject.
cursor would show up on the
It doesn't,
screen, but no.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just trying to point to the most inner concentric circle, the subject circle, which is the most active subject that you don't notice the ones that are underlying it. It's like the one that presents you with the final version. So
and you hadn't explained that either. Why there are three? That's just
an arbitrary choice on my part to demonstrate that you can have more than one.
And there's probably like more like a mountain range where you have many peaks.
Exactly.
Here and there.
Exactly.
Okay, so how are we connecting then this idea? Like, okay, fine, you're in space or whatever, and you're just saying this is where you are and what you have to deal with to learn about what's outside of it.
So first, strictly speaking,
how do we move to narrative or spectacle? Is
all
that
of this.
What we're doing?
Hold on, just a second. I'm getting there. Narrative and spectacle are very, very, very tightly connected. You'll see. So, the point I'm trying to demonstrate here is that space, as far as its subjective and aspect-wise elements, get lost to the wind, and only the final outcomes of the entire situation really get recorded as far as a representation.
Yeah. So, like your memory, and at that moment of success or failure or whatever, you recap, and this is when you create probably a symbol to symbolize that.
Right. So
or build a symbol stronger.
So you take the recorded things and you stitch them together, one by one. Right? You take your most resultant square and make that that's the object of the spectacle, right? Like that's what that if you were to like look at the spectacle as your eye, that you might see peripheral stuff, but the point of focus, right, is this object that's being represented down here. So all of this is to give focus to this object.
So quickly, we have to kind of come back to the small chart. The idea of it, anyways, that's what there's this cycle going on continually.
Yeah,
right?
The small chart will be the details of this, but it's not really important to go into them right now. All that's important to understand is that this moment, right?
On the left, you're pointing at, right, and you're highlighting two left boxes of white with a dark line between them. That's one moment, right? We have that labeled on the left there.
Right. So if you were to imagine this drop in boxes over and 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 over into this conveyor belt, right? You'll get this object dropped,
right.
You'll get this object dropped, you'll get this object dropped,
because no matter what, so what you're saying is no matter what, you're within space, and essentially narratives keep, or whatever, objects keep getting spewed out of that moment to moment.
Yeah. So this is trying to represent what happened, how those objects get stitched together. This is the responsibility of the mimetic layer. So it's taking the entire empathetic sympathetic structure, figures out its dysmorphism, tries to move to the isomorphic picture through the content that it's given, and consolidates to the next picture, which brings us to being here.
And so what you just described sounds like very obviously programmatic, and what that machine, if you will, is dealing with is those blocks and chunks that keep coming at it, right? From its space that it's in, if you will, right?
So
that's why it's mimetic. There's more active sort of thing that's happening.
And with that, you will get consolidations of these objects eventually. What I mean here, sorry. Let me try to see if I can Proximity complexes, right. Okay, so this is just saying that at each point in time we arrive at a half square.
Try to keep it centered like here too, by the way. Just,
Yeah, so each consolidated square from doing our space stuff becomes the focal point of input from the senses to be tested against to see whether or not the current situation is
Now,
isomorphic or dysmorphic.
this is a new type of square. This is looks like a rectangle to me,
Yeah.
which is different from the squares in our where we're stitching together there, right?
Yeah, the small diagram might help with that. It's like if you take this and it's just a part of that big square here. So it is a different way of looking at it. Another way to look at it is like you have this, right? And it runs. And what it runs into gets collected here.
Wait, okay, so I was gonna give a tip, like you say if you're talking, you got some here, and then it goes here, and then it goes over here. Like you can show that like a little bit for the stream, but not much. Just a tip, because like I saw you point to APS at the end, but like nobody else.
What I'm missing here is trying to tie object to moment. Objects in this diagram might appear a little bit more permanent, but remember with all the shifting time that I was talking about, they appear and disappear and appear and disappear and appear and disappear. And they feed as input to the proximity complex. The proximity complex needs to take this object, transform that, right, into the next set of objects that will appear.
So should we come back to like the small chart there for this, or
no, I don't think it's gonna help. I think we need to get the established.
okay, so what are we having here on space up top here? We're in an environment. It's like our neurochemical operating system knows that we're in an environment. It stacks us into layers of space, with the kind of latest one being the significant most.
You have to look at it as something that is spitting a stream of objects at you, but before it can spit out the next object, the first one is transformed into this
Right, so in other words, a
integrated
machine
into
has to go through a cycle before the next one can come.
right. And
As
what
weird as it is to talk
Right.
about that, like about your conscious awareness and all
So I don't want anybody to look at this line of squares and the spectacle and think to themselves, there's a string of objects appearing as
that.
a
Just center it. Talk about it centered.
So this stretching of multiple objects to feed into each other like this, into a string, right?
Yeah.
That's not the visual picture you should be getting compared to the rest of the model. So if you imagine, this is just a representation of the cycle I just described, having gone through multiple
Okay.
cycles.
So
So
let
in this
me
case,
help.
5.
Let me help here.
So here we've gone through it 5 times.
This.
And in order to integrate the previous object into
Yes,
the
it's
next
about
object,
time. It's about time.
It's about here. It's in that thick line called
Over time.
consolidation.
This gives you a lens into what's happening to create the hyper narratives.
Yeah, what these are
right?
describing.
So that's what the point of this part of the chart is, I think, is just to show you that over time we're having like object self similarity or whatever, and which is recorded, kind of like creating better connections in the neural network, right?
One of the ways, yeah.
That it's, you don't have to, I guess, see it as moment to moment. It's also a representation of the fact of, now I have one objective, I scratch my head, I've done that, now I'm on to the next thing, right? Immediately, right? One thing after another. That's what this little window is showing you. And this is through this, temporarily, objects can end up gaining, I guess, their kind of permanence, their reification, right?
Well, since one feeds into each to the next and to the next and to the next, you can also assert an object that represents the sequence, and that is what we would call the narrative. Like, it refers back to by mere idea or mere label to re-expand back into the sequence, like a memory.
Mm-hmm. Like, kind of like an untainted sort of.
To sort of recreate the situation over time in your mind out of the information that you have. So this ability to take this progression of the narrative, store it as a tripwire, so to speak, to recreate the progression of the narrative itself. So that's that's what this is whole section of narrative is actually really about. It's about the trapping of the sequential aspects into more objects, into more objects, into more objects, into more objects, all the way until you get a mythology.
Right.
So you have like an entire cosmos interacting with itself.
Right.
Hence, this is so relevant to cosmology.
Yeah. And you're ending up, I guess, with what gives us things like state, the state of things, as it were.
Yeah, you can pretty much use the hyper narrative and the meta narrative especially to denote what is the state of things. But the narrative is really the only pointer you get your hands on.
So I think we have probably now kind of linked up space here, like where you are, so to speak, with the ongoing, like where you are, your senses barrage you with like objects, right?
Mm-hmm.
They just get naturally represented, and then that is what's being chunked into, I guess, or collated or whatever into narratives, which can be chunked away and done different stuff with that, and that's where we're getting into hypernarrative, because we didn't really explain that.
So the
too much.
hypernarrative
and
is
off to meta-narrative down here.
the hypernarrative is the fact that you will get different narratives within the same needing to be combined somehow, like intersecting each other. So, like your car engine is a narrative that intersects your get into work late narrative, and like your stomach issue narrative is intersecting with you immediately using the bathroom as soon as you got there, which is intersecting with the narrative of Igor not liking you very much at that point in time. All of this exists in the same space and isn't necessarily the same narrative, but there's no contradiction. It's just all overlapping type things that are happening. And the moments can be looked at. Each moment, taken from different perspectives, can be stitched and found in all of that.
Right, and that's what you were talking about. Like, so we have this circle here, narrative. These are more kind of supposed to be generic stepping back memories. Like, this is as you remember it. And generally they're stored in the cosmos of the time, which you could revisit, I suppose.
And hypernarrative is just basically a collect...
taking pieces of these and where they probably interact at a common object.
And intersect each other, yeah.
Right.
So, up until now, we didn't actually expose any kind of problems, because all of this is pretty freaking normal for any individual to actually navigate pretty easily. It's when we have disconnected hypernarratives following completely random distribution of information, trying to be meshed together into the same space, having everybody to try to participate in that convoluted, unself-recognizing structure. Now, the way this is usually resolved is through either removal.
Okay, now
pieces.
Isn't that a fact of not of uncertainty, but entropy? Just let's say a fact of entropy.
It's a fact of not
that
having
things are like that.
No. Not
I got
entirely.
reminded of it because
Not entirely, because negative entropy also has something to say, and it's the way,
yep,
and that's
thank
just
you.
and it's by its function. All life internally starts from commonalities and diversifies after the fact. So you only get diversification the more out you go, if you know what I mean. Like if you go really, really back to the same thing, we're all chemistry. Then we're all DNA or RNA or whatever, enzymes. Then we're all constituents of all of these different genetic materials and proteins. And the story is basically there's more commonality at the bottom layers than there is at the top.
Typical, yes.
So
that's a consequence of stacking order.
So the premise is, the question you're asking is that what if we conceptually start off with zero commonality and just throw shit together? Well, this is where you get your obfuscated meta-narrative. The answer to that would be the other thing is to have a common starting point,
and that's hard to describe,
and then find connections through it.
It's hard to tell that to somebody.
And by common, I don't mean common culturally and in an enforced way, but common as in universal and is already present. Because up until this point, that's how nature operated, hence its presence. Like, that's our appeal to nature right there. So we got to start with a common metaphorical DNA, which we propose the model to be, which is about exactly these things.
Right. Yep. This gets into...
To see the nature of narrative and meta-narrative, and through seeing the nature of meta-narrative itself, seeing how it's obfuscated, resolve the problem of obfuscation by performing the activities that do not obfuscate it.
So that's an even lower layer way of describing how the ego dominates the self.
And we didn't even go there yet, and we're so close.
Yeah, but isn't that interesting? So this is actually even more like primordial than that explanation. And if you go above that, Mark Fisher wants to talk about group class consciousness, or subordinated group consciousness, right? That's his evolutionary term, which is the consciousness of anything that's being put underfoot by mind, or by the upper, by orders. Anything being crushed by order should have a self-awareness of that crushing, and this is what brings us together, right? This is like a generic, universal sort of...
and we describe what the crushing specifically
consciousness
is.
To be built,
and
Fisher would say.
And we describe what that crushing is specifically as model terms is download without upload, a broken reification cycle.
Mm-hmm. And reification, of course, was a huge, huge topic in that book, Post-Capitalist Desire.
And I love that he used the same word, because we've defined it to mean both up and down the stack, with upload being up, download being down.
Mm-hmm.
Be back.
And with that, indeed, we shall be right back. Are you serious?
Oh, bitch, you ain't going to be sexist on me.
Are you serious right now?
All right, so. Questions?
Subordinated group consciousness. So the awareness of the ego over the self. But even more primordially here, we're talking about the reification of the mind over the body. And this is, again, getting back to the kind of great schism topic, if you will. Yeah, that's, I mean, great Cosmos. Love it. 10 out of 10.
So, well, one of the reasons I wanted to mention, I didn't want to get into the moment diagram or the small diagram, because that's talking about the moment mechanisms and how the moment works. This is about the cosmos,
Yeah. Okay.
which actually we have given another.
Isn't that like a subpart of the cosmos? That little little
but
side chunk?
we're not trying to describe every mechanism in the cosmos, but just like how it's broken down. So we're
Right.
broken
So
down
it's
by
like
archetype.
metacosmos, if you will.
Yeah.
Which we don't need to go into. Okay.
Yeah. So we've broken it down by archetype to give us a good template as to how to approach all objects that become apparent. They're sort of unified nature. That's how you use the archetypes. You apply them as a template to any observed phenomena, really. And on top of that, we've tried to give the picture of how convolutedly complicated the simple idea of things gets stitched together into an ongoing flow of moment by moment by moment narratives.
And I kind of disagree that box is simply object, because I think it's a lot of objects at once. You know what I mean? Like,
Well-
you put object here, like what? That's just one. Like the chair is here now, getting stitched together with the foot, or what? Like, you know what I mean?
So you got to look at this diagram.
Or you're talking state-wise that this is the total object.
So that object comes into here. The entire process of the moment diagram takes place. That gets fed back through the system. An entire object comes through here.
Okay. So
That gets fed through. So
you're
imagine
pointing
this
at-
object being part of that object at first, and then blowing up to be the whole thing, and the moment is passed.
Yeah. So you're talking about this space area here we've described. You're saying, like, let's say this is the fridge on the left and this is the couch. Now you're coming over to the couch here, right? The fridge is already behind.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That's kind of the idea.
It's a sequential thing, yeah.
Okay. Because you focus only on one thing, that's your idea.
So I'd like you to picture these three squares inside space, eventually consolidating into one, and that one gets dropped into the next phase of the cycle, recycled back.
Yeah.
With a whole bunch of its constituent objects. This is how you connect different things together.
This happens due to neurons firing together, wiring together, as they say, that kind of a concept.
Right, like
You've had all three of these objects interact, boom, now they're done a story, but now the story of them three being together is kind of solidified that bit more. One more person footstep has walked through the forest path, and that's become a little bit deeper, right?
Yeah, so in this circle, I guess I should have made this clear. All of this consolidates into one box. That box is the thing that you can see as part of becoming the next box in the narrative structure, and then the narrative structure is a representation in a box of all the boxes that have preceded it into a stitched together narrative.
It's pretty wild, complexity of the density of matter for neural networks to function, to do all that shit.
It's pretty fucking recursive, I tell you that much.
Well, I mean...
Well, self-referential, of course it's going to be recursive.
Yeah, it doesn't... It's not actually like a computer data recorder doing terabytes per second of some physical... like a single physical phenomenon, right? Linear data. It's not like that.
No, it's intercepted by neurons everywhere, so it's like you can't even imagine the complexity of this fucking computer if it was imagined as one.
Right. And it'd be like trying to take all that data,
AI is
sift
like
through
the closest thing we have.
Sift through it to find this type of neural connectivity. That would be a fucking wild goose chase.
So yeah, points about narratives, hyper-narratives, and meta-narratives is that, yes, they're called different things and they're about the way narratives are themselves combined, but it's important to understand that you can only express a meta-narrative and a hyper-narrative through a narrative. So what will happen is either the meta-narrative collapses on inconsistency, or it becomes incomplete, but that's a different story. But my point there is, that even though there are distinctions between the different narratological
So
components,
remember, meet them where they're at. Remember that little tidbit? I think that's related.
it is. The other thing that's very important to understand is that when we talk about isomorphism in the narrative, we're talking about an isomorphic narrative that is an isomorphic hyper-narrative that is an isomorphic meta-narrative. And so when you get an isomorphic meta-narrative, you might have many different expressions, hence hyper-narratives, but it will tell the same narrative ultimately. So the run-through of the spectacle will look the same regardless of the structure of the hyper-narrative it's involved in.
Right.
So that's the
This
core
is a very-
idea of our isomorphism that could be said out there.
It's a very weird way of trying to identify something.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, the reason we even jumped into two phases after the fact of narrative is not only is there conflicting narratives between people, there's conflicting narratives between encompassing narratives. But at the same time, everything is only expressed through a singular narrative. Like it can only run through a single line of logic until it collapses on itself. Anyway, the point being is to describe the different layers at which narratives actually become significant, and to identify the pain points between those, which we keep referring to as obfuscation.
That's in other words, the problem of what's happening is when you don't have this cycle, which where things come back through to the beginning and make sense and line up.
Now, imagine if you interrupt this sequence of narrative at the spectacle level with a commodity that in the hyper-narrative sense plugs in one of these lines in the crossword puzzle, plugs in one of those lines, not through the objective or whatever, but through an obfuscated transactional activity. So there is no meaning passed from this square, from this line to this line. And now imagine combining all of these hyper-narratives only through transactional means, so that they're not... and then try to put them all into the same space with the same allow them to interact with the one at the same time.
And so ultimately
they'll crush each other.
These little machines, again, we're probably back to machines, right? They're ultimately not taking care of the organism, of the environment,
of the model that put them in the same spot in the first place.
Of the thing, yes.
And so having complete neglect for that, it just obliterates things that don't go into its own path. And so even though you stitched it up really cool together here, you bring it back there, you come back here, they're at war.
Right. And so, like, somehow
you know what I meant there, right? Because I kind of just pointed at the screen a bunch of times.
Well, nobody saw the pointing, so...
Yeah, I meant basically you stitch together this nice hyper narrative through transactional means, and you plug it into another transactional meta narrative. All of that comes back into real people, and they all have to act and behave in the same space and time with all of these different directives. They're going to be in a complete shit show of a conflict with each other, which is exactly the situation we have.
Right. So this is back to the point that only through kind of coming back to the things that really we all share, sort of like our kind of fundamental.
Right. In this case, being the building of narratives.
This is, and I think again, I'm going to mention Land's becoming replicant. he has a term like this, which I'm pretty sure is like dead on, like just become this, like almost drop yourself into like this, this like totally like it's sort of an individualistic, I guess, sort of, but with a social aspect. It would seem like if you're fully capable of doing the isomorphic narratives with others, then of course others will as well. That's the replicant aspect of it.
A group of fully mature humans will create a fully mature group. Even if the group needs to maturate from the get-go, from its birth to its final state of cohesion, the maturity of each individual will ensure the growth to that point. The immaturity of the individual will undermine it. And the maturity of the group is contingent there. So, to your point, is I think what you're talking about is like being an individual but in a group. Those are not exclusionary categories from each other.
Right.
Being a fully mature individual is also being in a fully matured group. It's the same thing.
Right, like there is definitely this maturity aspect to it.
Well, this is a maturity conversation too, because
Right.
we're talking about mental maturity, about the mental games we play with ourselves since childhood that we never gave
Like
up.
we have to sort of accept that basically the neurochemical operating system is there, and we know about it, and if we're either going to take our responsibility over it, or it's going to be used against us by people who know how it works, right?
And are not taking any responsibility for it. They're
Right.
just exploiting it.
So that I think is
Or elements of it, because you can bet that they don't have the full picture in that sense, because they're not interested in explaining what's happening. They're interested in how they can make it work for themselves.
well, there's this whole
Their explanation stops short of any of that.
you can't expect anybody in any kind of position of power or anything like that. Often you basically can't expect them to utilize their media towards these kind of isomorphic ends, because they'll be shuffled off, because this is like sapping power off of the stack, right?
Yeah, and
Basically.
you can
You're a number one threat kind of in that way.
and you can make the judgment call if they're in that position by how much of this do they really omit from whatever it is they're selling.
But this is kind of like an emergent model, right? It's straight up Buddhism, right? As far as I understand it, but your understanding is much cleaner than mine.
So Buddhism was developed from an experiential perspective. That I took Buddhism, tried to recreate the experiential perspective, and reiterate the exact same things that they said, because for a lack of a better way of saying it, it worked. Try to recreate what they said in a way that I find more palatable for 2,000 years later, after the fact of that initial exposition that relied on language
Right.
that's no longer used.
So like the Abhidhamma, that would be like kind of one of the main
yeah.
ideas here of the exploration of like consciousness, moment to moment.
The moment-to-moment consciousness idea, this entire diagram, in fact, is very much in the same spirit
Right.
of those writings there.
And why is this important to us then? Because again, we are living in this age of spectacle where it becomes our responsibility to learn how to navigate this. At least if enough people can navigate it, then we can work together as a group to, not just go into oblivion.
I can tell you.
Capitalist oblivion, if you will, the end game of capital, which is down to
Okay,
the
I won't
nub.
take it from that perspective, but I can tell you why this is important.
Okay,
Scroll down a little bit to the spectacle again.
here comes spectacle.
You see those thick, dark lines between that sit in the middle of each box?
Yes.
It is in that moment that small sliver of time that you have between the objects incoming and the objects outgoing, in which any willful cognitive decision is made.
So proximity complex.
Where you direct this, where you can feed.
And this is, you're bringing in empathy and sympathy, or calculations.
Correct. This is the tiny
Yes.
sliver.
I see what you're saying. This is actually such a small fulcrum point, like a small handle of a giant fulcrum. But to relate to the world outside as part of yourself or as something else, and then create your next moment.
And then do that again and again and again. And so it's like having a dashboard where a tiny little wheel turns the entire vehicle completely off course.
That's good. So we all have that's the choice at any moment, even during an argument, to boom, like just.
Yes.
We're all on the same team.
That's an implication of what I'm saying. Yes.
Right. Yeah, just trying to bring it down.
It also is another.
Down to the ground.
It's another implication with regards to responsibility. The ability to respond is within each and every single one of these thick lines.
Of course, we're still on our beautiful full screen, but.
Yep.
So we're just continuing on with the big chart, as we call it,
so
affectionately.
Funny you should say it's such a tiny point of fulcrum, because I don't know if you've noticed this.
Yeah, it's either like yourself or your other.
But no. There's another implication here. It's a tiny moment in which you do have control over everything that you don't, aka your moment, aka the dream. You don't have the control over that dream. However, what do you notice happening in every moment? And you kind of hit on that in the middle of your argument statement.
Happening, I was kind of gapped. In every moment?
What do you see inside of every single square? The thick line.
Right.
So even though even though the point of fulcrum is quote unquote really tiny on the whole grand scheme of things, and it seems like it's a hopeless little bit of control that seems to be overwhelmed about the entire sea, it's there in every single step of the way. There and there,
right.
and there and there.
And
it's everywhere.
This kind of
it's there.
drills down to a fundamental function of the neurochemical operating system, which is to identify what I am. What are my boundaries? Especially when you get into the human layer, right? Like like an animal, I can understand the boundaries is the skin, practically, family. There's
the boundaries is whatever the urge is.
Territory, a little bit.
Like, a lot of people think that while predators are like somewhat evil, right? Like they enjoy the pain of the other animal and whatever. But have you ever looked at a real hunt of an animal? The way they approach it? It's just, it's a bit of an adrenaline rush to like get into whatever state, right? To just like eyeball whatever your target is. But then when you bite down into the neck, do you really think that it's about hurting the animal at all? No, it's about the way it tastes to the mouth, the way the slowing down of the heart and all of that stuff feels. They're not evil. They're just like, this is what I'm supposed to feel.
Well, I don't know who is really arguing that.
A lot of people cannot get it into their heads.
That's neurotic completely.
Well,
we don't need to
shall
go
we
there.
describe neurosis? Anyway, so I think we can be done with this diagram because it's basically has said everything we needed to say, including a few finer points with regard to will and volition.
Did we include
and responsibility?
The special block, which is isomorphic with the entire this entire understanding?
I think we mentioned this, and all it's trying
not today, but
all it's trying to say is that if you take this entire diagram and stuff it into your database as one of the different artifacts that layers out your space and your context and everything else, it's going to create an isomorphism between as a descriptive power between what is being described and what is happening at the same time. So you'll have a matching description with what is happening
So it's like a
that involves this.
meta tool for debugging reality.
And lo and behold, it's a self-reference.
So we're on to next captain of this episode, Portal Mountain Cosmology. What is that? Oh yes. Wait, that's I gotta unzoom in my crude clicking fashion. Okay, here we go. Very nice. Bada boom.
All right. In the previous diagram, we had arrived at a situation where we can get what's called the obfuscated meta-narrative. And that is at a point in which, when we try to combine all the very lovely flowing hyper-narratives together, and the only way you can actually make them merge is through some kind of transactional laundering, aka transform something into currency of some sort, aka being a number, exchange that number for another number, and then transform that number into whatever else was needed, and therefore separating the different the necessary for reification between the two problems in a higher layer of mythology. Basically avoiding doing that, avoiding the reification, the neglect that we're talking about, the avoidance of reification. There you go.
Good.
That's the neglect. All right, so
Avoidance of reification. Wait,
yeah,
I was distracted. So, but anyways, carry on. Maybe recap. What are we talking about here? We got an obfuscated meta-narrative. This is what the whole cycle thing, and we're talking about how this works in a social matrix.
and we have our abstract phase space as a market machine. So that means that the objects that are in the abstract phase space, those squares that we were discussing earlier, are essentially nothing but self-propelled formulas, just numbers crunching numbers crunching numbers crunching numbers. So imagine this obfuscated meta-narrative being divided into these disconnected formulas.
I don't know, man. Like,
This is
you're
that,
not
this
you're not
is
telling
the-
the story in a way that I think anybody would understand.
Alright,
Because I see
so-
an ego here, agents, the matrix.
Oh, I didn't get there yet.
Sound
I'm
bites.
trying to start at the beginning. It doesn't get
I
there.
know, but obfuscated meta-narrative.
get
We
there.
see that. We know that.
So
It's
we know
from the last one.
So we know that from the last.
So we have sound bites.
Right.
These are
so
like-
so you take the meta narrative, which contains narratives inside of it, split them all out, you get sound bites.
Okay.
Okay, get a list of sound. Some of these sound bites are the rules and declarations of the market machine. Other sound bites are the no, this is not what I meant by this diagram. So, let me start again. My apologies, everybody.
Okay.
It's been a while. What I'm doing here is going, okay, so we have our obfuscated meta-narrative being split out into its sound bites, just like before, right? All of these sound bites are framed in the terminology of the market machine. So whatever is the transactional rule sets that are allowed. That's part of the mythology.
Mm-hmm.
All of
Like,
these,
if you give me money, I'll give you a hamburger.
right?
That's
Collect-
a sound bite.
So, one way, collectively, these sound bites formulate the myth of the system. So the myth of progress, the myth of meritocracy, the myth of nice, the myth of
Right.
politically correct, the myth of
Even this puts like a fast food restaurant as like some kind of holy place where people come in and get their hamburgers,
branded living.
right?
Another way to reinterpret it as all sound bites is your position in the market. So the position of your merit, the position of your nice, the position of your
Bank account.
bank account, all of these types of different things that constitute value judgments. See where I'm going with value judgments here?
Yes.
So you have your myth, and then you have your scoreboard of value judgments set against said myth. Am I scoring good on this myth? Am I scoring good on that myth? Am I a good person? Am I a nice person? Am I a meritorious person? Am I a progressive person? Am I I forget all of the myths. But you see what I'm saying? Like with each myth, there is like a question that where are you on the
So
scale?
wait, so you are now getting into like judging of the person, of let's say a self,
merit, yeah.
based on myths, in some sort of quantifiable manner.
Yeah, so you have your economy. That's what you were talking about, your bank account. That's one myth that drives value. You have your myth of science, of rationality, if you will, or scientism. That's actually the better. So scientism is like how educated I am in clever things, technically clever things, right? Like, can I do this more elaborate puzzle? How autistic am I, damn it? Right? Like, it's kind of driving at that question almost.
Sorry, I was spacing out today, or about today earlier. Never mind. It's cool.
My point is that there's a juxtaposition of the full-blown mythology that comes out of all of these sound bites, and the value judgments in accordance to these myths that tend to delineate people with in-group and the out-group.
So I'm hearing like
here comes ego,
like mythological, like almost like an identity or
a set of categories,
and then you're talking about like how do you identify, how do you actually quantify what satisfies that? Then there's a connection between these two things,
which are still the same because they're the same sound bites. So they're not different sound bites. Put together one way, it's the myth. Put together the other way, it's your standing in the process, right? Or not your standing specifically, but what it doesn't mean to stand in that.
Right. Like I guess I'm just pointing at the fact that
like if you say the wrong words, you're part of that group.
And in myth, often so like there's a hero to be like or something, and if you are like that or not, there's a certain degree you are and aren't based on quantified metrics, right? So and this is like spectacle shit, right? Because
so look.
That's what the soundbite would do to you, is say, oh, you have to be you have to wear this many pieces of flair.
I'll give you this as a soundbite. Tucker Carlson. In the mythological landscape, you have two camps. You have your left and right, which says Tucker Carlson is great and Tucker Carlson is awful, right?
Okay.
And then there's the ego calculation through conceit about whether the self stands with, neutral, or against Tucker Carlson. Right? So there's two counterparts. There's the ongoing myth itself, and then your position in it, quantifiable.
Okay, I see what you're saying there.
So each soundbite has got both things taken collectively together as the cosmological abstract that paints a cosmos content, not our cosmos. We're painting our cosmos with different content. Right. This is painting Hopefully. Its own cosmos. Mm-hmm. Taking that collection of sound bites again and running it through the conceit calculation with regards to the self. You get your myth one way and you get your ego the other way. And so there's no difference in myth, there's no difference in ego, there's no difference between myth and ego, and there's no difference between all egos.
Was that a recent thing, or like was that built into this?
That's built into this. It's just very poorly explained. There's another connection between soundbite and agent, and this is where it starts to get really interesting because myth feeds into the entire matrix, but an agency. While ego is the collection of all those sound bites, an agency is a subsection.
Yeah, sure.
So different sound bites for different agents. So this is how you can get a different feel for a different agency within. Well, if you combine it all, you
Mm-hmm.
get the matrix, obviously, without saying ego is at all differentiated at all, and without saying that there's any difference in the sound bites are involved. Yes, there is some uniqueness to all agency, but it's based on a completely false uniqueness because the ego is the same, the sound bites are the same,
Right.
in the ontological matrix are
And
self-reinforcing.
this is the exact argument for why, basically, why, let's say, rich people or whatever, capitalists, they don't actually have power. It's the capital itself has power over them.
Right.
They're just the
Over.
expendable
It's
puppet
that ego
to be
bit.
replaced next season, right?
Right. So here's the thing. We all tend to think about ego as something being individual to the person.
Right.
What you're fighting is actually not individual to the person, at least not in this description whatsoever.
Right.
It is the
so-
same thing in every person.
You're setting up with this diagram this kind of ego and myth kind of dichotomy or whatever you would call it.
Which is not.
But right.
They're self reinforcing 2 points of the same point.
Right.
And then you get this false differentiation in agency, and I chose that word specifically because of the matrix, and specifically because how everybody in the matrix could become an agent, how everybody could be a potential agent Smith. There's no difference between this one, and this one, and this one, and this one.
So, and for myth,
That's the case.
for myth here, we can look at something like 33 myths of the system.
Oh yeah,
Darren
that's
Allen.
actually
And see a corresponding kind of ego flare up out of each myth,
which
So,
is
right?
what was his book Self and Not Self was supposed to be. As far
About
as I
that.
understood his initial attempt, I think he changed his course throughout, but that doesn't matter.
Right.
But that was the initial
Cool.
idea on his part too, as
Interesting.
far as I know. Please don't quote me. If
Uh,
I'm wrong, I'm wrong.
Yep, but we love Darren Allen. Yep.
Even though he
He's-
might not like us.
It's fine.
He doesn't like Sots, and I don't blame him.
Yeah. So it's probably soured him to our work,
Jerks.
but we're all family, right? We gotta stick together
So,
and all that.
so after you get your
So
differentiation of agent,
obfuscated.
yeah. So after you get your differentiation of agency to seem different from ego to ego to ego, which is the same ego, combine that with a myth to give you the cosmology, you got your agencies, and together we have an ontological matrix. The matrix of activity, the matrix of ontological activity with which we have to deal. Another way to look at the ontological matrix is through the lens of our plateaus.
And this
and
gets
such
right
and so.
into economy, doesn't it? I mean, isn't that
This is
kind
where
of,
it starts.
Isn't
The
that
matrix.
what you do with that?
The matrix is where you plant, quote unquote, the guild. It is within the matrix where you see the guild. In our more expanded diagram, we have a bunch of holons instead of agents, but I'm now wondering if that is better served by the term guild.
Agent.
So
Guild.
the opposite, when you have the mirror image with
Hmm.
holons here, I'm thinking guild might be a better.
Holon is so generic,
I'll be right back.
but likewise.
guild is a holon, so it's kind of like meh.
And with that, we'll
Yeah.
be right back.
What do you call it? Loop back guild. Is that not a holon?
Sure.
So, this kind of brings us to cosmology. What the cosmology is. Because there's really no further exposition beyond.
You mean we weren't there yet?
This is it.
Okay.
We got there.
Yeah, so we're just gotta pull up.
Like yeah, but this expanded version is not part of the point anymore.
Doesn't matter.
Not yet. Not
Okay.
in this. Not in this point. Not in this stage. Because
All right. Well, we got like half hour.
Well, the
actually.
goal
We're into
was
the last bit.
So the goal was to build up the picture of the cosmos itself, right? And to show how this picture is obfuscated
Right.
by itself. How in it there is a mechanism for obfuscation, and that has to do when our abstract phase space is filled with the kind of information that is essentially unrepresentative of the model that is running itself.
Yeah. So in other words, the human archetype separating off from the animal archetype, and then going straight ahead and doing the thing that you warned it not to do, that you knew it damn well was going to do.
That's one way of looking at it, sure. It's another reason why I called it immaturity. And why I'm calling what we're doing, at least an attempt at maturing after the fact.
An attempt at maturing. That's fine.
What is a fully realized human, if not a fully maturized human being? And the fact that we are told that this is impossible, and that I'm seeing a lot of old senile people who are bitter about the life they lived, that is not a good thing.
Nope. Yep. Nope. Yeah. There's no end to kind of motivation, I guess, when you see.
How did old age become a curse?
The
system. That's how.
Yeah. Well, in the beginning, there was capital.
In the beginning, there were elders, and then they were ignored, and we've been ignoring them ever since. Well, then, listen to your peers.
It's not even that. The elders of the prehistory were like boomers. They just didn't understand the new platform tech. They couldn't
Well,
get up
in
with
a
their
world
medicine,
where
you know?
things never changed, and when things suddenly change,
Right.
and this age is, if anything, it's
So
just
like
an
that,
exaggeration.
that seems a little insane to compare. I guess the ancient shamans of the past, the medicine men, with boomers. But like, they totally missed out on the new tech? They couldn't handle it. They could not handle it, and we're still here. This is the
when
problem.
you talk about boomers,
this is
you're
what
not
we're
talking
dealing
about
with.
boomers, are you?
Just the mythological
Boomer.
the
mythological boomer.
Nobody, not even a generation in particular, just a word.
We're all boomers now.
Right.
Yeah, so this is this, I would say, is the whole of what we need to know and detail about the cosmology and its obfuscation.
What do you mean? How does this help us to like run a company together?
This doesn't. This isn't the conversation we want.
Okay.
The point of this cosmology exposition is because some of our methods are talking about taking the soundbite in faith initially.
And this is the soundbite.
And
It's like
extrapolating.
that
Yes,
one
this
isomorphic
is that
square.
soundbite, yeah.
The isomorphic square. The isomorphic square.
Yeah, and without the isomorphic square feeding back into the system, you got your dysmorphism.
So this is. It all depends on this right here.
Which is if you zoom right out, which points to
Da-da-dum.
the whole thing.
Yeah. That's great. Fantastic. The square, the square.
So we didn't cover two things.
What?
We didn't cover animism, its significance and relevance,
That's
and
the
why
holy square.
and why it needs to
Animism. Okay.
and why it needs to be reinserted,
That looks so ugly.
and why it needs to be reinserted into the
That's fine.
mix of modeling the entire thing. So one of the first things we started from was the layer stack of the neural operating system, which kind of derived from a stack of
That's where we started,
the Holonics hierarchy.
right?
So
Continue. I'm just completely effing around.
yeah. So
And paint froze. Sorry, guys.
So the point of mentioning that was the animism, or in other words, the complex adaptive system with grammatical capacities, is the underlying explanation / mechanism behind stacking itself. And the particular model is useful to explain a number of phenomena that are unaccounted for in terms of modeling, in terms of linear, in terms of linear sequence. So the other way of saying this is that there is a synchronic element to the cosmology that we're describing that has not yet been accounted for in our explanation, and that is non-existent in any scientific exposition of the universe itself, and so it doesn't have necessarily a representational parallel outside
Yeah,
of this discussion.
Because you don't have an external representation outside of the body, which is what you would need.
Because it doesn't recognize this fiat step, it only sees the code.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, we've mentioned earlier a problem with reification. And so I think our next session should be about completing the picture of what's wrong with the cosmos, what's missing with the current picture, the implication of resonance, and essentially what we want to bring into this is the addition of synchronicity into our cosmology.
We didn't really connect how an obfuscated meta-narrative matters. Like, how does that actually matter, that it's obfuscated? Where is the destruction?
I think I try to touch on it, is in that when you have all of these obfuscated hyper-narratives connected together through mere laundered currency, aka wedged together through sheer imaginary force, the outflow of said meta-narratives, the consequences of the next step and the next step and the next step,
is going to be highly entropic.
It's going to step on the toes of somebody else. It's like when you try to do any kind of activism right now, you're stepping on somebody's toes and they immediately take action against you. Right? Like, as soon as you're removing their source of currency, and this is how you keep obfuscating, by connecting more and more things through currency.
Look, having an obfuscation layer,
isn't
that a sign that you're missing all kinds of stuff and introducing entropy into the system? That's what the problem is. I don't know if you stated that, but that's
I didn't
what it
say
is.
it that way, but this would be another formulation.
So we just need that. We can. Now we know why it's bad.
Right. The more you relegate into like the numeric system, the less you have coming back out of it. That's not a number.
We need a system that through its actions, ultimately reinforces everything of its being, of where it came from, where it was all had bubbled up from. That is what should be sustained, and we can, in our own ways, discover what that path is.
Right. And obfuscation substitutes bits and pieces of all of those things with other things.
It's like saying, oh,
that-
you have this problem, here you go. It's the eternal charlatan. This obfuscated, like, capitalist system is basically the eternal charlatan. What capitalism started from the very beginning, the fact of reification and the fact of saying, I am capital. My body is to be used to sustain my body, even. You've broken the mind from the body right there.
So the break is in the myth by saying productiveness is survival. Productivity is survival. Equating productivity with survival, it would be the fundamental underlying myth. Not action in context, but productivity. Surplus.
And survival as a goal, fearful.
Survival is used as a gimmick because the
Something
system,
the mind can understand.
because the system, interestingly enough, doesn't give a shit
That's ego right there.
about survival of anybody. The expression "because market now go die" isn't there out of the blue.
Right. And capital owns the capitalist. It's not the other way around.
Right, it's a fiat system. Entirely. It's an entirely mechanical system, and of course, the more you tend to the machine, the more machine you have. Especially if it exists in the abstract. And in fact, you have dedicated jobs to tend to the machine in the form of the economist, in the form of the psychotherapist, and in the form of many other professions. The educator. Or academic, rather. To smooth your palatability, to smooth the machinery's palatability into your meaningless existence.
Good times, good times. So, what do we get from this cosmology? So, we are identifying some major problems with the way of cognition. And what are we going to do about that? Where does that translate to?
Having enough information as to make an informed response to what the cycles throw at you.
Yeah,
having an understanding of their origin, their effects, and their meaning, apart from their dictation of such things. So basically, to see the underlying process of the process.
So, this I can't remember who what was,
or as a soundbite of faith.
like Marcuse or something. Just lost my thought.
Its other significance is not in the details, but in that enough has been elaborated about it to take action with regard to it. You might not know all of these details we just described, right? But to take it on faith that there is an obfuscated narrative and move from that point and understanding yourself through that.
It's a lot
Again,
to
it's
ask.
it's a lot of conceptualization, but in reality, there is a few more simplifications that we've already come up with the methods.
Right.
It's just that most of these methods begin at the very least, accepting without necessarily knowing the nuance that there's an obfuscation, that there is an ontological matrix which is artificial, and that
Right.
artificiality obfuscates whatever is not what is said to be the artificiality. At the very least, like, these kinds of points are important. Anything beyond that is obvious, more of a study of interest thing. The importance of this cosmology is also to be foundational for the rest of our explanation for how and why things work a certain way. Why would we structure a method a certain way if this was not a cosmology?
Right.
Right, like the justification for the method's operation.
Yes. Yes. No,
itself.
I'm pretty glad that we did do this session with this topic. Like, just kind of try and nail it down. And I think there's still more to go, but
Oh yeah,
Um,
it's like the briefest explanation I could muster here.
like, this is the kind of thing that you really want anybody to understand first off. Like, that let's say I'm operating from a different perspective, let's say, right? And we can't cooperate unless we're on the same page, right? And it's a little bit complicated. But this is this is the responsibility to be taken up. This is where we are right now, right? Like, we know, like, we everything we have described, this entire that's being a bit overconfident, but these models and all this kind of stuff. Yep, just lost my thought again. But the good thing is I'm busy to probably hopefully make it even worse so a problem for our last half an hour here.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's a good point in there.
the cosmology
was.
itself is a way for me to also relay
I'll just try not to get so excited.
the point of the diagrams, how to put the diagrams together, what's the connection between all of these different, you know, we had like, we had two different tables and two different charts only to hone in on one single element of what the hell we're talking about and how it's like interrelated with the other components that we've tried to touch up on. For example, our entire discussion with regards to the narrative, right, is on the spectacular level. So that's the point of stitching objects together and making connections between objects after the fact that they've been identified as a particular type.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't explicitly say that, but if you looked at the very first chart we had about the layers, you'd notice that we're jumping around from abstract to concrete or the spectacular, and then the narratological with its diplomatic and cosmic layers sort of playing an over sort of not authoritative role, but like a kind of guiding, sort of holistic, combinatory element to it, to everything that we've been saying. So
Right,
yeah,
this is very core.
So in our last chart, we've pretty much run through the first chart and just described how the layers are related there and work together. So yeah. With the archetypes being a sort of an underlying template with regards to the nature of every object found in every narrative stitched together at all. So that's the picture. It's a very self-contained sort of thought behind it. It's not going to it's not going to be described differently at a later point in time. I know that much. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we didn't really get into that card diagram, by the way.
Yeah, the card diagram is going to be another couple of hours. So, because here, not only do we need to explain it, we also are talking about complex adaptive
can we
systems,
talk strategy
how they
for
make
a moment
layers,
here?
and this is what layers do.
Can we just talk strategy?
Sure, but first.
But first, we'll be right back. we'll just hit the unload on the microphone and allow us to chill. But okay, so we were saying, like, next session we want to kind of go into the organizational aspects of things, which is what I was trying to drive for. But Zhenya, you kind of insisted that this
The
was a
cosmos
great
is important.
time to do the cosmos. And what I was saying at the time was like, yeah, that makes sense. There has to be some kind of like abstract to like glue us together. That's how social happens.
Some kind of a representation, yeah. Which is the
Right.
cosmos is meant to be.
Right.
So with that, I wanted to paint a better picture of the cosmos with the involvement of the guild as a component of it, and then kind of dive deeper into what the guild looks like, so that when you look back into the guild functioning and the functioning in the ontological matrix, you can see the exact distinction and the model reintroduced back into the way the natural concerns were implemented prior to, and all of that jazz that we were trying to circle back to.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot to kind of pull and tie together here. Even though, so like, we've been doing our dev meetings for like 2 years. This year now has been about the book, right? Kind of like refining. We basically went over everything that we went in the first year, let's call it, year plus, and just kind of tried to condense it into a linear structure, right? Which that's what we've got now. And where next? Kind of a question. And like, the book itself is kind of leading into this psychedelic, like, concrete. Everything it's describing is like talking about the dashboard, for example. You're talking about things, not just static things, but what we're describing is the mimetic layers and the shared, like where you're beyond that horizon and things smooth out and trip out and all that kind of stuff. As a function, because that's how it has to function. This is the functioning in the world of a model. It's fucking psychedelic. To even think about it, to admit that the model you have is actually interfacing over that manifold out to the world through the senses and all that.
Cue in my distaste for objectivism.
Which probably more like binds itself in this reification structures.
Oh,
To
completely.
real is real, real is real, real is real. It's so real. Not saying real isn't real, but I mean that's like the song they sing in their head. So, a few notes here. I guess we've got like really, 10 minutes, whatever. Not much.
Smoke time.
Not too
haven't-
much.
We have enough time for a smoke.
So that's kind of like introduction to Portal Mountain cosmology.
Without Portal Mountain being presented at all yet.
Yeah.
So Portal Mountain will be an aspect of this cosmology that maps certain elements that, for lack of a better word, at this point of the exposition, obfuscated at this point in time. So we haven't touched on complex adaptive systems, which is the entire mechanism behind layering. And the reason this is important too, to note at least, is that we have a few more conceptual layering to understand the full picture of Portal Mountain on top of the ontological matrix. The ontological matrix is merely a constructive sort of baseline of navigating the world.
It's kind of like a top-down way of looking at the social too, like the interaction, the machines of interaction, the agreed channels of behavior.
So Portal Mountain points to things like coherence, Portal Mountain points to things like temperament. Portal Mountain points to things like the domains of progress, right? All of which are not expressed in any way in the ontological matrix, but are expressed in the underlying overall model of complex adaptive system that underlies it. So it would be to our benefit to dive into the animism, to explain layers, to bring that subject back to the layers of coherence, to the layers of temperament, and, well, no, temperament is not even.
Degrees of coherence.
Degrees of coherence, temperaments with associated ingress, and what else was there? Oh, domains of progress that underlie shifts between them, which are all entirely besides the reality, if you will, of the ontological.
And this is
matrix.
all seems like kind of like an extension of education a little bit, because it's like mapping of itself. This is like the education program of the network mapping itself.
It is a way. It is a
What it
way.
seems like.
It is a way to self-regulate your own maturation within the aspects of the model itself. Right. So you're given all of this. You're given all of this. This is how it is. Now there's the what I do with it, and that's
Right.
what I do with it. That self-regulation. This is where you get
And-
these extra categories.
And kind of like, what is my status too?
Yeah.
To like whatever, like
With it from the perspective of this real status is a weird word.
it's a weird word because of reification, because it's always abused. So
Well, it's
put that
conceited.
out.
It's conceited in its almost phrasing.
What I meant that in reference of like state,
Sure.
like as a generic as possible, the primordial archetype. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a way of kind of like judging, looking at yourself, quantifying what your relationship,
Which is still conceited.
your relationship to the Portal Mountain model, whatever.
And it's still conceited.
It's more like, I mean, it seems natural, like a self-reference, generic self-reference, right? Like conceit, ego, attachment through desire.
You can only separate conceit by not going through the transformation of pain to punishment, pleasure, and to reward.
But I associated usually conceit with that side of the affect chart, but we probably shouldn't get into that because we have probably about 5 minutes left, and it has been a very thorough meeting.
I hope
It
the
seems like
cosmology is
single
actually
topic,
clear to you.
topicular.
As far as cosmology goes,
As
agreeable.
clear as it can be, but what do we do with it then? What do we do with
Don't worry
this?
about that. Don't worry about
That's
that. The questions I have is it agreeable? Like, agreeable not from the perspective of does it feel good, but is it agreeable from the perspective of, yes, there's mental gymnastics involved. A, how useful are they? And B, the picture that you're getting is also has a utility for it after the fact. So
Well,
it's not a matter of
aside
mainly
from my
creating-
objections, I think we're well beyond that question.
Which objections? Sorry, remind me. Can you just remind me?
Well,
This is important though to get to the bottom of, so that we understand what to fix.
right. I don't have any objections.
So I take it not the premise. So is there a point of confusion? Going from,
Well, I mean, like, you and I just both walked through all of this stuff. The card diagram not included. I don't know why you put that on top.
I tried to. I
But
tried to use it, but it doesn't matter now.
yeah.
So,
Of the vast
sta- sta-
things that we just described,
starts-
do I understand every last thing?
Start-
Yes.
Starting from its from the cosmology discussion being in the position of the eighth layer, the abstract, moving into that it is viewed as a pure potential with these underlying archetypes from uncertainty to state. Like, do those make sense as the underlying premise as far as all objects
Well,
are
we
concerned
walked
inside
through.
of
We
it?
can walk through every. We didn't do NCOS walkthrough.
The composition of all
But we
objects
targeted
into
on the
space
APS.
for the formulation.
We went
of the
right into
moment.
the archetypes. You and I walked through every single archetype with complete understanding. So is it after that what you're asking about? Because I
asking-
know that we understood each other.
So
that we did understand.
So no.
Up
So
to
we
that
took
point.
all of that, made it.
And remember when I made fun of your programming gobbledygook, as I called it,
Let me finish.
for this in the top right of the screen there, the space aspects and all this, right?
Mhm.
I'm not saying I completely know how to program fucking reality,
No.
okay?
I don't want you to. That's not it.
Well,
I'm just saying. Okay, the archetypes that we covered, being the templates for every single square in this little bubble, and then extending all of that to say that the function of these squares is actually multiplexed into all of these different variety of situations.
that's how it would be.
Out of which something is
You
stitched.
didn't
moment by
mention it,
moment
you
by
didn't
moment
connect
by
it at the
moment.
time, but yeah, let's imagine 12 boxes in there.
Right, which are all stitched together
Point.
to juxtapose this weird subject-object type interaction, out of which is run through at the moment, giving us that pause of choice in the hard line over the thick line. That choice drives the continuum.
Right, so choice point being very interesting, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it?
Will, volition, that's what it is, or autopilot.
Isn't it? So interesting.
And then out of that, we have different formulations of said narratives stitched together into hyper and meta narratives. The meta narratives being the one decaying into the explicit bits, because that's your integrated meta narrative as well. It's the things.
Okay,
It's
so
the
wait.
things you come to integrate
Hold on.
in your belief
We started
system.
this whole conversation with like, yo, how can I want to organize like company? How can we like expand out to our organization from more than just us doing
Well, I
this
covered
and a
that
few
for
people?
our next mission.
And it's like-
that's our next meeting.
Right, but then
If we cover this, we're done. Our
like,
next meeting
how
is
are
going
you
to be.
connecting that knowledge with how we interact with each other?
We reach this point. Guild dynamics starts at this point. Then we
The
start to fill in.
Matrix. By
Yes.
this point, he means Matrix, folks.
Sorry.
He doesn't understand that he's pointing at something that we don't see.
I am not here for the camera.
I'm just kidding, buddy. Yeah.
My point is
We're at
that
the Matrix.
the-
We've arrived finally out of all this boring abstract.
To understand how to construct a corporation and
It's okay, next
institution
time,
in the institution.
for our next
we have to
meeting-
understand that we're putting it into the ontological matrix. To understand what that means, we have to describe where the fuck it comes from, and to get to that point, we have to go through all of this.
Yeah.
To get to the obfuscated meta narrative, to see how it decays into its own sound bites, which we show in one way or another in both two diagrams. Here it's explicit. In the big diagram, it's implicit, where you have a line going from the meta narrative back into the APS. Right here, you have that line, which is called decay,
way back up in there.
which is system, and
Yep, when
decay
things happen.
It decays systemically.
So shit happens, and
No, it's a filtering
the
mechanism.
system remembers.
It's a filtering mechanism that says, does this belong with ongoing logic that is going on? In, out, in, out, in, out. Archetype of state, right there. It's also the expression of the machinery itself. So this decay is itself natural, and we're not talking about...
Deciding in or out
That's what the state archetype does.
as to what's relevant anymore and to be recorded
What's filtered out?
for the next
What's filtered out? What's not?
moment to moment.
Mhm.
What's there and what's not.
So through this filtering system, we see a decay, and another way to look at all of that is the second diagram, where we get the decay into the sound bites, and where all of those sound bites are,
It's dead, Jim.
where all of those sound bites are representing some kind of marketing machine speak or soundbite. We get a clusterfuck of obfuscation that causes an obfuscated mythology to arise, with the supplanting ego to impersonate it through different agencies depending on situations.
Damn, cool. So we've arrived at the Matrix, and basically that's our next meeting. We are done with, I guess, the book series for now.
Yep. Next
call
session
Now we're into whatever else. It's
next session we're carving out a shelter within that matrix, which is our first natural concern.
booyah. And with that, we will see you all next time.